Hello, everybody. We are live now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another stream. We are going to be reading the Two Towers, being the second part of the Lord of the Rings today. Let me just go ahead and get everything set up and get the word out as well. Let's see. Come on. There we go. I need to switch accounts. There we go. Alright. Not gonna work if I'm not on the proper... Hey, Alice. Oh, what is that emote? Is that an orca? I believe that's an orca. How's it going? How about that moment when in the foreword to the revised edition of The Hobbit, Tolkien had to go out of his way to tell people that orc was not related to orca. I guess people were making that assumption at some point. There we go. Okay, I got the proper link. Alright, well, I don't need to hear myself, that's for sure. Hey, Walter. How's it going? Many greetings, my Gavanin. And hello there to Tommy Does Chile. Greetings from Patagonia, Chile. Tommy and Walter, by the way, both send me some really good questions. I feel like the quality of... I was just talking to Walter about this. The quality of the questions that I've gotten for my regular videos has been really good lately. Also, I noticed that the lighting in here is not super great. There's one light that I forgot to turn on, so I'm just going to go and turn that on real quick. Put the book over here, and then I'll get everything ready. I'll be right back. There we go. Alice is waiting for a pizza to arrive. Now, you know that you have to give me the pizza details. You can't just say that you're going to get a pizza and not tell me the details. Speaking of which, somebody once asked me, hey, Moogle, would Tolkien, would he have ever had pizza, you know? And I said, yeah, absolutely. He was a big fan of Italy. So he, of course, would have had pizza. And he was a big fan of eating in pubs in England. So he would have had pizza there as well, Margarita. Excellent choice. Classic. We had chicken salad today for dinner. But anyway, welcome in. I just wanted to say that, yeah, I've been getting really good questions. This week's episode that's up for members. If you're not a member on the YouTube channel, it's next week's episode 125. You may notice is extra long. It's like an hour and a half long. And that's partly because I've been putting that extra bit on the end to review the quizzes. But... Yeah, he called Italy Gondor. He did. He called it Gondor. Cinnamon bread knots. Interesting. You'll have to let me know how those are. Usually if I'm ordering from a pizzeria and I'm getting some kind of knot, it's not usually cinnamon, it's garlic. but anyway, I've noticed that the questions have been getting better. Like Walter sent me a question. It took a full 11 minutes for me to explain. Some of the sections got very long, which is why I was actually going to do extra questions, and I had to cut some out to be next week. Tommy sent me I forgot what your question was, Tommy. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't remember. But I remember it was really good. Hold on, I'll bring it up. I'll tell you what it was. I don't remember what Tommy asked me, but I thought it was really cool. I'm not getting the same old boring questions like, why didn't they just fly the eagles all the way to Mordor? That would have been easy. That's a plot hole. You know how people get. Yeah, if you just give me a moment, I'll... Tommy sent me a really good one. Walter sent me a great one about scrapped Valar, which I thought that was a fun one to do. Because there are quite a few scrapped Valar. Some of them became other characters, and some of them are just gone. And we're going to talk about that a lot at some point when we get to the Book of Lost Tales. But, okay, I'm looking for the one that Tommy sent me, because Tommy sent me a good question as well. And I'm looking for it. No, that was a fellow named John Scheidner. Was it this one? No, that was another John. That was John Doe. Got a lot of John. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Okay. So, Tommy, your question was fun. You asked me about if there's anybody in the Lord of the Rings who could stand to fight against Sauron. You didn't ask me if anybody could beat him, which I think was an important distinction. The question was quite controversial on Quora, but, you know. Do I get tired of people trying to find holes in the world? Well, yeah, I'm very tired of that, especially since people sort of, oh, hey, Matt Damon, how's it going? They do these ridiculous things like they'll say, if a character in the book, and this is not just The Lord of the Rings, it's any book ever, or any movie ever, or any play ever, or anything that you can think of that has characters in it, if they didn't think of a specific thing that the viewer or reader or whatever has thought of, then that's a plot hole. They'll say, well, I found a plot hole. Why didn't such and such do this? And the answer is going to be, well, because the character didn't think to do that, because people don't always have the benefit of hindsight and looking at things from an outside perspective of not being a part of the story. I mean, how many things in your life can you look back on and go, well, why didn't I just do that? That would have been much easier. That would have solved the issue and not made things worse. And wow, I really messed that up. It's a big plot hole. You know what I mean? Yeah, so it's the kind of gotcha questions are really, really silly because they're almost entirely in bad faith. Hey, Will. Occasionally you'll get a new reader, or especially a new fan that has come from the Peter Jackson films, and they'll say, you know, well, why didn't they ride the eagles? Because they don't understand the nature of the eagles, and you know, and what they're looking for is not for the story to have been rewritten in that way, but they're wishing that it was addressed. That, you know, perhaps somebody at the Council of Elrond could have said, well, why don't we fly to Mordor on the back of eagles? And then Gandalf would say, that wouldn't work because such, and such. But the thing is, most people don't think that way in the situation. Hey, NBJ, how's it going? Yeah, it's tiresome. You know, I do get tired of that sort of thing. But I have found the questions that I've gotten to be very good. Now, for those of you who were looking for, on my YouTube channel, who were looking for a quiz today, or if you saw a quiz that disappeared, I'm going to explain that. We've been putting up these daily quizzes on the community tab that people are finding them to be marvelous fun, and I've been enjoying them. And seeing the results and everything. And today, I actually based it off of something that somebody asked me on a stream, where they asked me, hey, do you know which was the first of the dwarves to arrive at Bilbo's house in The Hobbit? And even I had to think for a moment, because I don't usually keep track of like the order of characters arriving and things like that, unless it's important to the plot. But I said, I think it was, I want to say Dwalin. I'm not sure, it could have been Balin, but I'm pretty sure it was Dwalin. And, you know, I was right. It was Dwalin. I thought, well, okay, let's put that out there as a fun little question. The problem is normally when I'm writing these quizzes, I'm on my computer. And this time I was on my phone. And the first time, it auto-corrected and decided to change. I must have spelled something wrong, and we're going to fix that for you. So it changed the word dwarf to award, which is confusing. which was the first award to arrive in Bilbo's house, you know. And then the second time, I deleted it and I reposted it, and it changed bag end to bad end, that's not close. That's not the name of Bilbo's house, and it looks silly. So I was like, okay, third time. I had the spellings right, you know, no autocorrects, no situations like that. The problem was it flagged the incorrect answer as correct. It was telling people that it was Balin and not Dwalin. So I was just like, you know what? It's not meant to be. I'm just going to scrap the quiz for today. We'll try again tomorrow. We'll chalk it up to the devilry of Isengard. You know, some Dwemery sort of nonsense was happening with my phone today. So lesson learned and applied. How's everybody doing today? Yeah. And NBJ, I don't try to answer it that way, well, that's the way the story. When people ask me things like, well, why didn't they fly the eagles? And, you know, I can tell them, you know, 10 or 15 in-universe reasons why that's a terrible, terrible idea, you know. That was you. Well, yeah, no, I saw your comment there, Sithis. You were not the only one. I was 3 times, though. It happened 3 times. That, yeah. Is anybody here familiar with the concept of something being Dwemery? I wrote an article about the word Dwemer. Well, it was specifically about a scene from The Return of the King, where Eowyn says Dwemerlek. And I was asked essentially, what is Dwemerlek? What does it mean? Is that something that Eowyn came up with, or is that a real word? And the answer is quite complicated. And I did a lot of linguistic delving, especially into the word lake. L-A-I-K, lake. And I found that a lot of people in studying Tolkien believed it to be related to a different form of lake, L-A-K-E, that was used as a verb. And it didn't really fit comfortably. I forget what that definition was, but it didn't really. It's in the article. It didn't. Not Dwemer. Dwemer with an I and 2 M's. I figured though anybody named Sittins for Sithis would think of the Elder Scrolls. Obviously, you know, he sends somebody off to serve Sithis in the void. But anyway, I wasn't really happy with people. You know, the common Tolkien scholar, like Christina Scull and such, is saying that it was related to this verb lake. And what I found is that it was related to an Old English word, slech. Well, actually, that's Old Norse. Old English would be lech, which is to droop or sag as a verb, but as a noun, it refers to a mantle. A drooping cloth garment, which is something that the Witch King would have worn. And especially since Tolkien specifically uses the term mantle in that scene to describe. And Dwemer, we talked, you know, it's related to sorcery and such, you know, black magic, necromancy, that sort of thing. So when she says Dwemerlake, she's basically saying cloaked specter, and it's a reconstruction, or I should say, of like something that we would say is Neo-Old English, meaning that it wasn't a word that existed in Old English, but it's a good approximation of a word that may have existed in Old English, similar to in the very next scene that Theoden refers to Merry as Master Hobbitla, which Hobbitla is an Old English form of hobbit, which means somebody who dwells in a hole. But anyway, the reason I bring it up in relation to the devilry of Isengard and the issues I was having with autocorrect and glitching apps today is that there's actually a computing term, which is to say that a computer is acting Dwemery when it tries to anticipate your needs. And autocorrect is a big part of a computer acting in a Dwemery fashion. However, what's interesting is that even though it seems like some sort of form of sorcery, and that would be why it was named that, it's actually an acronym for DWIM, do what I mean. So, I saw WT that your speedrun record there was broken, so. Hey, maybe you could you do like a virtual machine? Is that a possibility? But yeah. Your order was canceled. What happened? Yeah, and NBJ, you're right. The thing is, like, I got accused on Quora of answering the same questions over and over again, and I could have been sort of very flippant and said, well, why don't you ask better ones? But the truth is that people are asking better ones, and this was specifically about a question about the clash at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm between the Balrog and Gandalf. And I've covered it so many times that maybe if somebody didn't actually read what I wrote, they're thinking that I'm just answering the same thing. But it was specifically a question asking me, why wasn't Durin's Bane, the Balrog, intimidated by Gandalf? And I was able to make the argument and make my case that the Balrog was intimidated by Gandalf, and it's something that I've always thought but never had the opportunity to write about before. So it was an exciting thing to write. But this person obviously didn't pay attention to what I was reading, or maybe they thought that I had written about that before, about the Balrog being intimidated. That's not true, that I had never written about that before. And he accused me of, just sort of covering the same ground. And I said, look, there are questions like, why didn't they fly the eagles to Mordor, that have existed since before I was born. And they will exist after I am gone. And it doesn't matter how many different ways I answer it, or how many different ways other Tolkien scholars answer it. Tolkien himself answered it. Okay, this is a question that he was asked directly, and he said the Eagles are not a taxi service. That was his very polite answer to that question. So, it's been asked and answered thousands of times over. It's never going to go away. Alice says, did you know when you walk through a door and forget that why you're there, it could be because you ran into an alien and he had to erase your memory so he could escape? Well, good for him. It's actually something called the portal effect. But yeah. Oh dear. Well, WT, I hope you find a solution to that. I hope you find a solution to your Windows problem and your speedrun problem. Wait, let me read what you're saying, NBJ, and I'll get to you in a second, Tommy. I've never seen the movie, but the Balrog could have been seen as intimidated or not, because it's not deciding to fly over the old man showed that it saw the old man as a threat, or you could say that he wasn't, by the idea that the monster was just debating on how or why this old man was in his way. Well, okay, two things. One is that Balrogs can't fly. So that's a big reason why he wouldn't decide to just fly over Gandalf. He certainly could have jumped over him, though. So that is true. But he knew what Gandalf was because Gandalf identified himself. That's what makes this such an interesting and highly debated scene, is Gandalf said that he was a servant of the secret fire, and that is a way of communicating his exact nature in a way that the Balrog would understand, but that the Fellowship would not. Because it's important to know that the Balrog and Gandalf are the same thing. They're both angels, and they're both of the same order of angels, which are called Maiar. The only difference is that one is a fallen angel and the other is not. And when he says, I am a servant of the secret fire, he is identifying himself as a servant of God, an ally of God, that he is not allied with Melkor. Hey, Time Lord Guy, how's it going? Another guy who sent me a lot of great questions, Time Lord Guy. So many that I had to not answer all of them right away. I'll get to some of the others. So, every line that Gandalf said was an attempt to intimidate the Balrog, and a successful attempt, because he also said, I am a wielder of the flame of Anor, which Anor is an elvish word. It has a few meanings. One of the meanings is just flame, which that's redundant, the fire of flame. But it is the name of the sun. And the thing about the sun in Tolkien's world is it's not only is it the greatest fire of all, but it is also holy. It is hallowed by Varda. So he is saying that his fire is bigger, and it is also holy fire. And so the Balrog in that scene dims his fire and expands his shadow. He's reacting to what Gandalf is telling him. Hey, Laurel, how's it going? You know? So, so he's, every line that he says, the dark flame will not avail you, flame of Udun, which Udun is an elvish word that means hell. So he is saying that he's not some sort of fool that doesn't know what he's up against. He knows what the Balrog is and is capable of, and that he's up for the challenge. So, what I'm saying is that the Balrog was absolutely intimidated by Gandalf. Not only by Gandalf, but there is a moment where, don't worry, Laurel, we haven't even really started yet. We're still here, just chatting before we start reading the book here. But there is a moment where Boromir rushes forward and blasts on his horn, and the Balrog actually steps back for a moment. And that's a really powerful moment, that this fallen angel would be stopped in his tracks for a moment by a mortal man blowing into a horn. But it's something that we see because if you read, the Silmarillion and some of the deeper lore, you know that his master, who Tolkien called Melkor, you might call him Satan, was quailed by the blowing of a great holy horn called the Vala Roma. And this is something that, it's a sound that he would be familiar with and a little afraid of. And also that the Balrog is actually sort of a war refugee, somebody who fled the War of Wrath. So, which was this incredibly devastating war that happened that lasted for 40 years and destroyed a whole region of Middle-earth. So, yeah, like I said, it was an excellent opportunity for a WT. Just reminder, Thursdays, keep the language clean, please. Alice, could you just nuke that one message? I lost my train of thought here. What was I saying? Oh dear. Thank you, Alice. What was I saying? I was on to something there. I was on a roll. Okay. I was on a roll and I've unrolled. Hey, Medio, how's it going? What was I saying about the Balrog there? I had some sort of observation to make. That he was a refugee from the War of Wrath. He's heard that kind of thing before. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that. I'm sorry. It's okay. Don't worry, NBJ. You're giving me an opportunity to talk about this stuff, which is what these streams are for. That's okay, WT. It's an easy mistake to make. We fix those mistakes rather quickly. I'm gonna address some of the other questions that came through in just a minute. I'm just trying to remember where I was going with this whole Balrog thing. Oh well, I guess I don't know. But yeah, Oh, yeah, so I was just sort of wrapping it up and saying, so this was a great opportunity for me to recharacterize the Balrog in a way that people are not familiar with because they think of it. See, the Balrog does not speak. It doesn't laugh. It doesn't snort. It doesn't make any sort of noise until it's dropped into the pit. And, you know, you find out later about this epic battle between Gandalf and the Balrog that went on for 11 days. And then you really start to think of Gandalf differently. But the mistake is thinking of the Balrog as simply being a monster. It is an incredibly powerful demonic force that is on equal footing with the likes of Gandalf and Sauron himself. So, you know, it's incredibly dangerous, incredibly intelligent, and incredibly magical. But there is a common thread that we see in Tolkien's villains. They're not very brave. Would I say that Sauron is like the devil? Time Lord, like, no, Melkor is the devil. As a matter of fact, there's actually a video interview with Tolkien himself. There's not a lot of video of Tolkien out there. There's only about a half hour of it that we can enjoy. But one of them little clips is him answering that exact question, where he basically said, Sauron is not the devil, but he knows the devil. So Sauron is a fallen angel that has decided to align himself with the devil, not because he loves him, but because he believes that that is the way that he's going to fulfill his own desires. So I would say he is a devil. He's just not the devil. He's not the satanic figure. Were the Balrogs capable of speech is a really interesting question. I would say no. Not because they lacked intelligence, because I think that being incarnated into these specific bodies, they lacked the physical ability of speech. Tolkien stated that they should make no vocal noises. The only vocal noise that we've ever heard of a Balrog making is a yell. I believe that Balrogs could communicate perfectly well without speaking, as they were experts at what Tolkien called the Osanwe Kana, which is mind reading and projection. But I have to scroll up a bit here because there's a few questions that came through that I wanted to address. Let's see. Tommy asked me if I would do a deep dive into why the Soviet Union allowed The Hobbit, but not The Lord of the Rings. I'm assuming you're meaning publication. It's a simple reason. The Lord of the Rings is more blatantly anti-imperialist. Although the Soviet Union did produce an adaptation of The Lord of the Rings at a stage production. But it's not enough to go into a deep dive, because it's just the politics of the day were different, you know, in the 50s than they were in the 30s. Let's see. Imagine being the Balrog who, when he had last sensed a Maya, was probably during the War of Wrath before he fled to Khazad-dûm. That alone made him feel like the Balrog was a bit scared. Yeah, I mean, for all he knows, if Gandalf gets out of Moria, he's going to go straight to Eonwa, and then it's really all over. You know what I mean? At least it's all over at that point. The worst thing I feel about the Two Towers film, that horse Shadowfax, all that stuff about him being the king of horse. Oh yeah, Gandalf says in the movie that he's the Lord of Horses, when really the line should have been, a more appropriate line would have been a Lord of Horses. He's one of the Mares, which is like equine nobility, so to speak. you know. I think we're caught up. Was there anything else that I need to address? Several steps down from Lucifer was the exact phrase, David, that Tolkien used. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of recordings of C.S. Lewis, that's true. Not even really a lot of good pictures of him. Certainly no pictures of him and Tolkien together, which is a shame since they were together a lot, both in work at Oxford, and they were just out and about. They used to go to movies together, Disney films, and they would roast them. They would go to parties and cause all sorts of problems, you know. There's really not a lot. I mean, there's not a lot of Tolkien. There's only about a half hour of footage of him. There's more audio recordings of Tolkien because they made records of him, but yeah. But yeah. So, yeah, like I said, the trap that people fall into, specifically with the Balrog, is they think of it as a monster. They should be thinking of it as a demonic force. That being said, I'm going to kill the music here, and we're going to get started on our... if I could find where the music is, actually. The music is coming from one of the hundreds of tabs, there it is, that I have open. Okay, let's go over here. Now, the last time we left off here, we're still on Book 3, which is part of the Two Towers, being the second part of the Lord of the Rings. And we only got through one chapter last time. Occasionally happens. That was chapter 6, The King of the Golden Hall. And this, as a matter of, I just want to, since I was about to mention this, I didn't mind Gandalf saying that Shadowfax is the Lord of all horses. It's not exactly accurate, but it works for a movie. What I minded was that they made Shadowfax a snow white horse, and it sort of tainted the artistic depictions of Shadowfax that we would see going forward. Everybody sort of draws Shadowfax as being a white horse, when there are many, many passages in the book that refer to Shadowfax being gray. Sometimes they use the word silver, which is really just a shiny gray. So that's something they got wrong, and I guess it's just a lot easier because there's not a lot of silver horses out there, you know. Oh yeah, you know. Well, they both had a healthy distaste for Walt Disney. I believe Tolkien's exact insult that he used for Walt Disney was that he was a buffoon. He hated Disney. And I know that the one story that they both loved, that they're both very fond of in Germanic lore, is Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Or I should say dwarfs, because that's the way they said it back then. But they knew the Disney movie was going to butcher it, so they went together to sort of, you know, roast it. I imagine they threw popcorn at the screen. I don't know if that's true or not. I know they went together, though, and I know they roasted it. Yeah. I mean, they did a good job with... WT is right. They did a good job with showing Shadowfax to be quite majestic. They just didn't show him as being the color that he should be, you know. Okay. Let's go on to Chapter 7, Helm's Deep. I don't think any introduction is needed. You guys are all pretty familiar with the events of Helm's Deep, even if you only saw the movie. So let's dive in here. The sun was already westering as they rode from Edoras, and the light of it was in their eyes, turning all the rolling fields of Rohan to a golden haze. There was a beaten way, northwestward along the foothills of the White Mountains, and this they followed, up and down in a green country, crossing small swift streams by many fords. Far ahead and to their right the misty mountains loomed. Ever darker and taller they grew as the miles went by. The sun went slowly down before them. Evening came behind. The host rode on. Need drove them. Fearing to come too late, they rode with all the speed they could, pausing seldom. Swift and enduring were the steeds of Rohan. But there were many leagues to go. 40 leagues and more it was as a bird flies from Edoras to the fords of the Ison, where they hoped to find the king's men that held back the hosts of Saruman. Night closed about them. At last they halted to make their camp. They had ridden for some 5 hours and were far out about the western plain. Yet more than half their journey lay still before them. In a great circle under the starry sky and the waxing moon they now made their bivouac. They lit no fires, for they were uncertain of events. But they set a ring of mounted guards about them, and scouts rode out far ahead, passing like shadows in the folds of the land. The slow night passed without tidings or alarm. At dawn the horns sounded, and within an hour they took the road again. Just to pause here, not to speak specifically about any sort of lore here, because this really is just descriptions and such. 2 notes here. One is you can see that Tolkien's prose here is just fantastic. He really sets the mood. The other thing is I want to point out I've mentioned I've mentioned this a few times, but this is, I think, important. When I was young and I was reading, well, starting with The Hobbit, but then going into The Lord of the Rings, each of these books came with a map, and you can see that there. And it was a great joy to me as a child, but with The Lord of the Rings, more of an adolescent, I guess, to follow along where the characters were on the map. So I would have my finger in there like that, and then I would go to the map and I would just see where they were, and then I'd go back and I would follow the adventures whither they may go. And he always puts these little things in there that really make you feel like you're there, because they're traveling to a direction that you might call west by northwest, so they're basically going west with a slightly curve to the north, going from Edoras, where Medusel, the Golden Hall, is, to the fords of the Ison, where the Deeping Combe and Helm's Deep are. And they just mention that the Misty Mountains are on their right because it's to the north. They're going sort of beyond, Fangorn and all that, and the mountains are far away to the right. And it just makes sense that if you're traveling to the west, that what's north is to your right. And it just really, I feel, puts you in the world, We see that a lot, especially in the early parts of Book 2, when the Fellowship are traveling to the south of Rivendell, and the mountains are on their left there. And then we'll see it in Book 6 when they're traveling up through Dunland towards Rivendell, and the mountains are going to be on their right. And it's just these little bits that I think just paint the picture. Now let's continue. There were no clouds overhead yet, but a heaviness was in the air. It was hot for the season of the year. The rising sun was hazy, and behind it, following it slowly up the sky, there was a growing darkness, as of a great storm moving out of the east. And away in the northwest there seemed to be another darkness brooding about the feet of the misty mountains, a shadow that crept down slowly from the wizard's veil. Gandalf dropped back to where Legolas rode beside Éomer. "You have the keen eyes of your fair kindred, Legolas," he said, "and they can tell a sparrow from a finch a league off. Tell me, can you see anything away yonder towards Isengard?" "Many miles lie between," said Legolas, gazing thither and shading his eyes with his long hand. "I can see a darkness. There are shapes moving in it, great shapes far away upon the bank of the river. But what they are I cannot tell. It is not mist or cloud that defeats my eyes. There is a veiling shadow that some power lays upon the land, and it marches slowly downstream. It is as if the twilight under endless trees were flowing downwards from the hill." "And behind us comes the very storm of Mordor," said Gandalf. "It will be a black night." Okay, a brief pause, just to mention, speaking of Legolas here, this is real. I think it's really interesting. I've said it many times, and people don't like to hear it necessarily, but it is somewhat true, that Legolas is barely a character in The Lord of the Rings. He's a bit player, really. Tolkien even says that out of the 9 walkers, he accomplished the least. And that is interesting just to say, because that number includes Boromir, who died, and Legolas is immortal. So it's interesting that we really don't know anything about him as a person. All of what we know is sort of the catty things that he says to Gimli, and then the friendship that comes from them, and the sort of way that he looks up to Aragorn. And, well, that's about it, really. We know a lot more about his martial prowess than that we know about his personality or his history. But what's interesting here is just this little line, I don't know if you guys caught it, where it mentions that he was shading his eyes with his long hand, which I would suppose is a way of saying that Legolas has very long fingers. And that is honestly the closest that we get to a physical description of him. Like, we really don't know anything about what this character looks like. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of characters that we really don't know what they look like. We talk about this a little bit, like people. There's memes that I went over when I did the YouTube video series of the Tolkien iceberg, and a few of them were mentions to hair color. And we know almost nothing about his past. We don't know his mother's name. We don't know if he has any siblings. We don't know when he was born. So he's a mystery. He's a cipher. And there's sort of this thought that, like, maybe Frodo had blonde hair, right? And there's really no indication of that. Blonde hair was actually specifically mentioned to be a rarity amongst hobbits, and that most of them had brown hair. Legolas's hair color is never mentioned. It became really, really popular to depict him as blonde, starting in the late 70s when the Ralph Bakshi film came out. He was bald. No, probably not. Because the Ralph Bakshi film just pretty much dropped him into the story where Glorfindel would have been. And Glorfindel absolutely was blonde, which was unusual for a Noldo elf. They were usually black-haired. Of course, that doesn't apply to Legolas. He's a Cinder elf. But Glorfindel's name literally means golden-haired. Maybe he had frosted tips. You know, if they did that in the movie, it wouldn't have been out of place for the time period that the film came out, right? That was a kind of a look that people had during that period. But anyway, it became popular to depict him as a blonde in the 70s, and then, of course, when the Peter Jackson films came out, which were very informed by the Ralph Bakshi films, we had Orlando Bloom, who doesn't have blonde hair, but they gave him long blonde hair for his role as Legolas, and now it's pretty much all you see. My estimation is that it is somewhat likely that Legolas had blonde hair, because it was mentioned in a very offhand way in The Hobbit that his father, Thranduil, had blonde hair, specifically mentioned as golden hair. Now, of course, the father having blonde hair does not mean that the son must have blonde hair. It just means that it's likely, it's likely. They copied Link. Well, okay, hold on. Link, I do know a bit about video games, Tommy, and Link was not blonde until the late 90s. The original Link had brown hair, and then the one on the Super NES game, he had pink hair, actually. You wonder if the elves ever had a hairstyle called the Elvis Presley? Straight to Angband with you, Walter. The Elvis. See, you could have said Elvish Presley. That was right there. Why didn't you do that? He was strawberry blonde in Link to the Past. Well, I mean, that's a cute way of saying he had pink hair. You know what I'm saying? He had pink hair. But yeah, Link's first appearance as a blonde was the Ocarina of Time game. And I think they were actually copying a lot of the common thoughts that these sort of Sylvan characters would have blonde hair. Anyway, let's move on here. As the second day of their riding drew on, the heaviness in the air increased. In the afternoon, the dark clouds began to overtake them, a somber canopy with great billowing edges flecked with dazzling light. The sun went down, blood red in a smoking haze. The spears of the riders were tipped with fire as the last shafts of light kindled the steep faces of the peaks of Thyhern. Now very near, they stood on the northernmost arm of the White Mountains, 3 jagged horns staring at the sunset. In the last red glow, men in the vanguard saw a black speck, a horseman riding back towards them. They halted, awaiting him. He came, a weary man with dinted helm and cloven shield. Slowly he climbed from his horse, and stood there a while, gasping. At length he spoke. "Is Eomer here?" he asked. "You came at last, but too late, and with too little strength. Things have gone evilly since Theodred fell. We were driven back yesterday over the ice, and with great loss. Many perished at the crossing. Then at night fresh forces came over the river against our camp. All Isengard must be emptied, and Saruman has armed the wild hillmen and herdfolk of Dunland beyond the rivers, and these also he loosed upon us. We were overmastered. The shield wall was broken. Erkenbrand of Westfold has drawn off those men he could gather towards his fastness in Helm's Deep. The rest are scattered. Where is Eomer? Tell him there is no hope ahead. He should return to Edoras before the wolves of Isengard come here." Theoden had sat silent, hidden from the man's sight behind his guards. Now he urged his horse forward. "Come, stand before me, Ceol," he said. "I am here. The last host of the Eorlingus has ridden forth. I will not return without battle." The man's face lightened with joy and wonder. He drew himself up. Then he knelt, offering his notched sword to the king. "Command me, lord," he cried, "and pardon me. You thought I remained in Meduseld, bent like an old tree under winter snow. So it was when you rode to war. But a west wind has shaken the boughs," said Theoden. "Give this man a fresh horse. Let us ride to the help of Erkenbrand." Let's pause here for just a moment here. The pointed ear thing. Okay, we'll talk about that. The pointed ear thing came from just the fact that elves were generally... In folklore, were generally depicted with pointed ears. There was a note that Tolkien wrote to his publisher that specifically said that hobbits had pointed ears, and he said pointed elvish ears. That's not to say that elvish ears were necessarily pointed. In a very, very obscure note that he wrote, which was in the Vinyar Tangwar, I believe, which was a language journal about the history and language of the Quendi, which is the elves, he happened to mention that the ears of the Quendi were more leaf-shaped than those of mortal man. Of course, leaf shape is very nebulous, very vague. There's a lot of different types of leaves out there. But it's generally believed that what he was saying was that elves had very slightly more pointed ears than men do, and there are men in real life that sometimes have slightly pointed ears. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine from way back in the day dated this girl who had pointed ears, and she had a very elvish sounding name, Corinne, you know. But anyway, it's usually used in depictions for people to easily differentiate who's an elf and who isn't. Sort of like in old paintings, especially during the Renaissance, oftentimes angels, biblical angels, were depicted in human form, which they did take from time to time in the Bible, but they were depicted with wings, and it was never mentioned that the angels in the Bible would be like people with wings. There were some of their true forms that would be just like a mess of wings and eyes, but that's besides the point. That was just the artist's way of letting somebody just look at a painting and immediately differentiate who is an angel and who is a mortal man. So it's sort of like that sort of idea, really. She gets jokes about it. Where are your wings? Hey, pointed ears can be quite fetching on the right person. We'll just say it that way, right? Hobbits, I think the reason that he wanted hobbits to have pointed ears was just because they were... he didn't want you to just think that they were just merely short people. So he gave them these traits like pointed ears and very hairy feet to sort of make them a little different and a little bit more mythological and unique, you know. All right, let's move on here. Where was I? Oh, here we are. While Theoden was speaking, Gandalf rode a short way ahead, and he sat there alone, gazing north to Isengard and west to the setting sun. Now he came back. "Ride, Theoden," he said. "Ride to Helm's Deep. Go not to the fords of Isen, and do not tarry in the plain. I must leave you for a while. Shadowfax must bear me now on a swift errand." Turning to Aragorn and Eomer and the men of the king's household, he cried, "Keep well the Lord of the Mark till I return. Await me at Helm's Gate. Farewell." He spoke a word to Shadowfax, and like an arrow from the bow, the great horse sprang away. Even as they looked, he was gone, a flash of silver in the sunset, a wind over the grass, a shadow that fled and passed from sight. Snowmane snorted and reared, eager to follow, but only a swift bird on the wing could have overtaken him. So just to mention this, that this is confusing to some people. Why did Gandalf suddenly run off to find Erkenbrand like that? Of course, he does return with Erkenbrand and the forces of the Westfold to flank Saruman's forces and to turn the tide of battle. But this is really interesting, is what he's really doing here isn't just breaking off and going to do that, but making sure that Theoden and his people don't go in that direction. Because time is of the essence, and if they go, they're never going to make it to Helm's Deep and be able to fully entrench themselves. Speaking of wings, could, for example, Sauron transform himself into a body with wings, but humanoid and flying around? Absolutely, Walter is correct. He did turn into a vampire, and the vampires had bat-like wings, and they even mentioned pinions. He was able to fly, and as he flew over the treetops, this was in the book, this was in Beren and Luthien, blood dripped from his mouth and stained all the trees. So Sauron could fly, yes. As an angel, well, I mean, I don't see why not. If he could fly in one form, the reality of it is that he could probably fly in any form he wished. You know, the Maiar have these ways of traveling and moving, walking on water, all sorts of crazy stuff. So, absolutely, there's no reason to think that he couldn't do that. He would just need a practical reason to do it, I suppose. Let's continue. "What does that mean?" said one of the guard to Hama. "That Gandalf Greyheim has need of haste," answered Hama. "Ever he goes and comes unlooked for." "Wormtongue, were he here, would not find it hard to explain," said the other. "True enough," said Hama, "but for myself, I will wait until I see Gandalf again." "Maybe you will wait long," said the other. The host turned away now from the road to the fords of Isen, and bent their course southward. Night fell, and still they rode on. The hills drew near, but the tall peaks of Furharn were already dim against the darkening sky. Still some miles away on the far side of the Westfold Vale lay a green coombe, a great bay in the mountains, out of which a gorge opened in the hills. Men of that land called it Helm's Deep, after a hero of old wars who had made his refuge there. Ever steeper and narrower, it wound inward from the north under the shadow of the Thurhern, until the crow-haunted cliffs rose like mighty towers on either side, shutting out the light. At Helm's Gate, before the mouth of the deep, there was a heel of rock thrust outward by the northern cliff. There upon its spur stood high walls of ancient stone, and within them was a lofty tower. Men said that in the far-off days of the glory of Gondor, the sea kings had built here this fastness with hands of giants. The Hornburg it was called, for a trumpet sounded upon the tower, echoed in the deep behind, as if armies long forgotten were issuing to war from caves beneath the hills. A wall, too, of men of old. The men of old had made from the Hornburg to the southern cliff, barring the entrance to the gorge. Beneath it, by a wide culvert, the deeping stream passed out. About the feet of the Horn Rock it wound, and flowed then into a gully, through the mist of a wide green gore, sloping gently down from the Helm's Gate to Helm's Dyke. Thence it fell into the deeping coombe, and out into the Westfold Vale. There in the Hornburg at Helm's Gate, Erkenbrand, master of the Westfold and the borders of the Mark, now dwelt. As the days darkened with the threat of war, being wise, he had repaired the wall and made the fastness strong. CW train. Dripping blood as you fly. That's not dark or anything. Yeah, the Silmarillion is messed up. If you read it, it's like, whoa, none of that was in the Lord of the Rings. And there is a pile of dead. I'm sorry, not a pile. Let me say this correctly. There is a mountain of dead bodies in the Silmarillion, and I don't just mean I'm metaphorically saying that there was a lot of people that died. I mean that there was a battle that was so terrible that Morgoth took all of the bodies and piled them up and made a mountain out of them. And that he named the mountain. Thank you for subscribing. That was so loud. That was so loud. But let me just pause here just to mention this stuff about the Hornburg. So if you guys, I don't know if you saw the film version here, not the Two Towers, but the War of the Rohirrim. And absolutely, 100% Walter. The War of the Rohirrim, they did a pretty good job of adapting that particular story, even if they changed a few things around here and there. But one thing that they got wrong, and it was understandable because they were trying to stay in continuity with the Peter Jackson films, was that after, the whole thing with Helm Hammerhand, and they said that it was called the Hornburg, and that they would now rename the castle Helm's Deep, after Helm. That's not actually the case in the book. As a matter of fact, if you noticed here, Helm's Deep is the valley, the Deeping Coombe. The castle is the Hornburg. It was called the Hornburg after Helm Hammerhand because of his horn. He'd blow his horn, and there's a legend that his wraith would still wander the halls of the Hornburg blowing his horn. That's why they renamed it. It was the Soothburg before that. As a member, this was named by people from Numenor, not Rohan. It predates Rohan. But anyway, let's continue here. Did I get ahead of myself here? No, I didn't. Okay. The riders were still in the low valley before the mouth of the Coombe, when cries and horn blasts were heard from their scouts that went in front. Out of the darkness arrows whistled. Swiftly a scout rode back and reported that wolf riders were abroad in the valley, and that a host of orcs and wild men were hurrying southward from the fords of Isen, and seemed to be making for Helm's Deep. "We found many of our folk lying slain as they fled thither," said the scout, "and we have met scattered companies going this way and that, leaderless. What has become of Erkenbrand, none seem to know. It is likely that he will be overtaken ere he can reach Helm's Gate, if he has not already perished." "Has aught been seen of Gandalf?" said Theoden. "Yes, lord. Many have seen an old man in white upon a horse, passing hither and thither over the plains like wind in the grass. Some thought he was Saruman. It is said that he went away ere nightfall towards Isengard. Some say also that Wormtongue was seen earlier, going northward with a company of orcs." "It will go ill with Wormtongue if Gandalf comes upon him," said Theoden. "None the less, I miss now both my counsellors, the old and the new. But in this need we have no better choice than to go on, as Gandalf said, to Helm's Gate, whether Erkenbrand be there or no. Is it known how great is the host that comes from the north? "It is very great," said the scout. "He that flies counts every foeman twice. Yet I have spoken to stout-hearted men, and I do not doubt that the main strength of the enemy is many times as great as all that we have here." "Then let us be swift," said Eomer. "Let us drive through such foes as are already between us and the fastness. There are caves in Helm's Deep where hundreds may lie hid, and secret ways lead thence up unto the hills." "Trust not to secret ways," said the king. "Saruman has long spied out this land. Still in that place our defence may last long. Let us go." Aragorn and Legolas went now with Eomer in the van. On through the dark night they rode, ever slower as the darkness deepened and their way climbed southward, higher and higher into the dim folds about the mountain's feet. They found few of the enemy before them. Here and there they came upon roving bands of orcs, but they fled ere the riders could take or slay them. "It will not be long, I fear," said Eomer, "ere the coming of the king's host will be known to the leader of our enemies, Saruman, or whatever captain he has sent forth." The rumour of war grew behind them. Now they could hear, borne over the dark, the sounds of harsh singing. They had climbed far up into the deepening coombe when they looked back. Then they saw torches, countless points of fiery light upon the black fields behind, scattered like red flowers, or winding up from the lowlands in long flickering lines. Here and there a larger blaze leapt up. "It is a great host that follows us hard," said Aragorn. "They bring fire," said Theoden, "and they are burning as they come, rick, cot, and tree. This was a rich vale, and had many homesteads. Alas for my folk! Would that day was here, and we might ride down upon them like a storm out of the mountains," said Aragorn. "It grieves me to fly before them." "We need not fly much further," said Eomer. "Not far ahead now lies Helm's Dyke, an ancient trench and rampart scored across the coombe, 2 furlongs below Helm's Gate. There we can turn and give battle." "Nay, we are too few to defend the dyke," said Theoden. "It is a mile long or more, and the breach in it is wide." "Ah, the breach in our rear guard must stand if we are pressed," said Eomer. There was neither star nor moon when the riders came to the breach in the dyke, where the stream from above passed out, and the road beside it ran down from the Hornburg. The rampart loomed suddenly before them, a high shadow beyond a dark pit. As they rode up, a sentinel challenged them. "The Lord of the Mark rides to Helm's Gate," Eomer answered. "I, Eomer, son of Eoman, speak." "This is good tidings beyond hope," said the sentinel. "Hasten, the enemy is on your heels." The host passed through the breach and halted in the sloping sward above. They now learned to their joy that Erkenbrand had left many men to hold Helm's Gate, and more had since escaped thither. "Maybe we have 1,000 to fight on foot," said Gamling, an old man, a leader of those that watched the dyke. "But most of them have seen too many winters, as I have, or too few, as my son's son here. What news of Erkenbrand?" "Word came yesterday that he was retreating hither with all that is left of the best riders of the Westfold, but he has not come." "I fear now that he will not come now," said Eomer. "Our scouts have gained no news of him, and the enemy fills all the valley behind us." "I would that he had escaped," said Theoden. "He was a mighty man. In him lived again the valour of Helm the Hammerhand. But we cannot await him here. We must draw all our forces now behind the walls. Are you well stored? We bring little provision, for we rode forth to open battle, not to a siege." "Behind us, in the caves of the deep, are 3 parts of the folks of the Westfold, old and young, children and women," said Gamling. "But great store of food and many beasts and their fodder have been gathered there." "That is well," said Eomer. "They are burning or despoiling all that is left in the vale." "If they come to bargain for our goods at Helm's Gate, they will pay a high price," said Gamling. I need to pause here, mostly to drink water here. Saruman would have taught them to sing. Keep in mind, Saruman's main thing is his voice. And these are Uruk-hai. They have Mannish ancestors and Orcish ancestors, so they would know a lot of nasty sort of songs to sing in a few different languages, I think. You're curious how Helm's Deep came to be built in the first place. No doubt this wasn't a just-in-case for later. It was one of the many fortresses that the Númenóreans built when they were colonizing Middle-earth. They put these little fortresses around. As a matter of fact, Isengard is another one of those. And you can see that they're very close together. Isengard and Helm's Deep. You have one that is well fortified, but open at all sides, and with a very tall tower where you can look out and see for many miles. And then another one where you could lay and hold off a siege for a really long time, and with these vast caves beneath them. So it's sort of a strategic move when Numenor was colonizing Middle-earth. Yeah. Yes, these aren't black Uruks of Mordor. These are Uruk-hai, the orc folk of Isengard. All right. Let's see. I don't think there was anything I needed to talk about. I really just needed a drink of water there. Oh, actually, I wanted to ask, quick little impromptu quiz here for both chats here. Whether you're watching on Twitch or whether you're watching on YouTube, this is let's see if anybody knows. As a matter of fact, you know what? Let's make this interesting. I got a free Steam game that I'll give away to the first person to get this right. Why was Helm called the Hammerhand? First person that types this right in the chat, I'm going to give them a Steam game. A random Steam game, not anything in particular. I'll spin the wheel for you guys. Let me get that ready while you guys say, why do they call Helm, the former king of Rohan, the Hammerhand? There's a particular reason why he's called that. Might be obvious if you've seen the movie, maybe not, I don't know. But let me go ahead and get the wheel to spin here. No, Walter, that is incorrect. He did not use a hammer in battle. Feel free to guess again. Let's see, who gets this right? Whoever gets this right, I'm going to give them a free PC game on Steam. Let's have a little fun here, right, guys? Time Lord guy. He killed people with his hands. That is actually correct. He once punched a guy to death. It was a Dunlending named Wolf, and he hit him so hard that the guy died. And that is where he got the name the Hammerhand, because his hands were like hammers. Time Lord guy, are you by any chance on my Discord? Hey, Colin, how's it going? Because you just won a free copy of The Dark Side Detective. Let's see what that actually is. You got a free copy of the game The Dark Side Detective for knowing about Helm Hammerhand. Okay, let's see what that actually is. All right, so here's The Dark Side Detective. It's a $15 value here. It is a point-and-click adventure game. Looks pretty neat. I'm going to send you a free copy of that. You're not on my Discord. Do you have Discord? If you do, I'm going to ask Walter, could you get an invite link? Otherwise, just tell me what would be the best way to send you the Steam code. I can email it to you or whatever you prefer before we continue on here. Hopefully you have Steam. If you don't, you could always give the code to somebody else, but you want it. You do. Walter, would it be possible that you could get a Discord invite link from my Discord and post it to the YouTube chat? I'm going to continue reading a little bit, and then we'll come back to this, and I'll make sure that you get that. There you go. There you go. All you got to do is click that, and then you'll see me at the top of the list of people. Just send me a message, a DM, and I'll reply back with the Steam code. Okay, I'll look for that in just a bit. Let's continue on here. The king and his riders passed on. Before the causeway that crossed the stream they dismounted. In a long file they led their horses up the ramp and passed within the gates of the Hornburg. There they were welcomed again with joy and renewed hope, for now there were men enough to man both the burg and the barrier war. Quickly Eomer set his men in readiness. The king and the men of the household were in the Hornburg, and there were also many of the Westfold men. But on the deeping wall in its tower and behind it Eomer arrayed most of the strength that he had left. For here the defence seemed more doubtful, if the assault were determined and in great force. The horses were led far up the deep under such guard as could be spared. The deeping wall was 20 feet high and so thick that 4 men could walk abreast along the top, sheltered by a parapet, over which only a tall man could look. Here and there were clefts in the stone through which men could shoot. This battlement could be reached by a stair running down from a door in the outlet court of the Hornburg. 3 flights of steps led also up to the wall from the deep behind, but in front of it was smooth, and the great stones of it were set with such skill that no foothold could be found at their joints, and at the top they hung over like a sea-delved cliff. Gimli stood leaning against the breastwork upon the wall. Legolas sat upon the parapet, fingering his bow, and peering out into the gloom. "This is not to my liking," said the dwarf, stamping on stones. "Ever my heart rises as we draw near the mountains. There is good rock here. This country has tough bones. I felt them in my feet as we came up from the dike. Give me a year and 100 of my kin, and I would make this a place that armies would break upon like water." "I do not doubt it," said Legolas, "but you are a dwarf, and dwarves are strange folk. I do not like this place, and I shall like it no more by light of day. But you comfort me, Gimli, and I am glad to have you standing nigh with your stout legs and your hard axe. I wish there were more of your kin among us. But even more would I give for 100 good archers of Mirkwood. We shall need them. The Rohirrim have good bowmen after their fashion, but there are too few here. Too few." "It is dark for archery," said Gimli. "Indeed, it is time for sleep. Sleep, I feel the need of it, as never I thought any dwarf could. Riding is tiring work, yet my axe is restless in my hand. Give me a row of orc necks and room to swing, and all weariness will fall from me." All right, let's just see. Right. Your name on Discord is Attic? Is that you? Oh, I see the friend request. Hold on one moment. Yeah, love the Legolas and Gimli dialogue. I just want to verify, Time Lord, you're Attic. I just want to make sure I'm giving it to the right person. You know, because it's a thing that somebody could have just come in, I'm just going to click that link and DM him real quick and see if I can get that. You know, I just want to make sure that's you. A slow time passed. Far down in the valley, scattered fires still burned. The hosts of Isengard were advancing in silence now. Their torches could be seen winding up the coombe in many lines. Suddenly from the dike, yells and screams and the fierce battle cries of men broke out. Flaming brands appeared over the brink and clustered thickly at the breach. Then they scattered and vanished. Men came galloping back over the field and up the ramp to the gate of the Hornburg. The rear guards of the Westfolders had been driven in. "The enemy is at hand," they said. "We loosed every arrow that we had and filled the dike with orcs, but it will not halt them long. Already they are scaling the bank at many points, thick as marching ants, but we have taught them not to carry torches." It was now past midnight. The sky was utterly dark, and the stillness of the heavy air foreboded storm. Suddenly the clouds were seared by a blinding flash. Branched lightning smote down upon the eastward hills. For a staring moment the watchers on the wall saw all the space between them and the dike lit with white light. It was boiling and crawling with black shapes, some squat and broad, some tall and grim, with high helms and sable shields. Hundreds and hundreds more were pouring over the dike and through the breach. The dark tide flowed up the walls from cliff to cliff. Thunder rolled in the valley. Rain came lashing down. Arrows thick as the rain came whistling over the battlements, and fell clinking and glancing on the stones. Some found a mark. The assault on Helm's Deep had begun, but no sound or challenge was heard within. No answering arrows came. The assailing hosts halted, foiled by the silent menace of rock and wall. Ever and again the lightning tore aside the darkness. Then the orcs screamed, waving spear and sword, and shooting a cloud of arrows at any that stood revealed upon the battlements. And the men of the mark, amazed, looked out, as it seemed to them, upon a great field of dark corn, tossed by a tempest of war, and every ear glinted with barbed light. Oh, hella hey Chewie, how's it going? Time Lord Guy, are you still there? I just need you to verify that your name on the Discord is Attic. Is that correct? If so, I'm going to send you that code as soon as I get a verification there. Brazen trumpets sounded. The enemy surged forward, some against the deeping wall, others towards the causeway and the ramp that led up the Hornburg gates. There the hugest orcs were mustered, and the wild men of the Dunland fells. A moment they hesitated, and then on they came. The lightning flashed, and blazoned upon every helm and shield the ghastly hand of Isengard was seen. They reached the summit of the rock. They drove towards the gates. Then at last an answer came. A storm of arrows met them and a hail of stones. They wavered, broke, and fled back, and then charged again, broke, and charged again, and each time, like the incoming sea, they halted at a higher point. Again trumpets rang, and a press of roaring men leaped forth. They held their great shields above them like a roof, while in their midst they bore 2 trunks of mighty trees. Behind them orc archers crowded, sending a hail of darts against the bowmen on the walls. They gained the gates. The trees, swung by strong arms, smote the timbers with a rending boom. If any man fell, crushed by a stone hurtling from above, 2 others sprang to take his place. Again and again the great rams swung and crashed. Éomer and Aragorn stood together on the deeping wall. They heard the roar of voices and the thudding of the rams, and then in a sudden flash of light they beheld the peril of the gates. "Come," said Aragorn, "this is the hour when we draw swords together." Running like fire, they sped along the wall and up the steps, and passed into the outer court upon the rock. And as they ran, they gathered a handful of stout swordsmen. There was a small postern door that opened in an angle on the burg wall on the west, where the cliff stretched out to meet it. On that side a narrow path ran round towards the great gate, between the wall and the sheer brink of the rock. Together Éomer and Aragorn spread through the door, and their men close behind. The 2 swords flashed from the sheath as one. "Gwythwine!" cried Éomer. "Gwythwine for the mark!" "Anduril!" cried Aragorn. "Anduril for the Dunedain!" Charging from the side, they hurled themselves upon the wild men. Anduril rose and fell, gleaming with white fire. A shout went up from wall and tower. "Anduril! Anduril goes to war! The blade that was broken shines again!" Dismayed, the rammers let fall the trees and turned to fight. But the wall of their shields was broken, as by a lightning stroke, and they were swept away, hewn down, or cast over the rock into the stony stream below. The orc archers shot wildly and then fled. For a moment Éomer and Aragorn halted before the gates. The thunder was rumbling in the distance now. The lightning flickered still, far off among the mountains in the south. A keen wind was blowing from the north again. The clouds were torn and drifting, and stars peeped out, and above the hills of the Coombe side the westering moon rode, glimmering yellow in the storm rack. "We did not come too soon," said Aragorn, looking at the gates. Their great hinges and iron bars were wrenched and bent. Many of their timbers were cracked. "Yet we cannot stay here beyond the walls to defend them," said Éomer. "Look!" He pointed to the causeway. Already a great press of orcs and men were gathering again beyond the stream. Arrows whined and skipped on the stones about them. "Come, we must get back and see what we can do to pile stone and beam across the gates within. Come now." They turned and ran. At that moment some dozen orcs that had laid motionless among the slain leaped to their feet and came silently and swiftly behind. 2 flung themselves to the ground at Éomer's heels, tripped him, and in a moment they were on top of him. But a small dark figure that none had observed sprang out of the shadows and gave a hoarse shout, "Barak Khazad! Khazad Amenu!" An axe swung and swept back. 2 orcs fell headless. The rest fled. Éomer struggled to his feet, even as Aragorn ran back to his aid. The postern was closed again, and the iron door was barred and piled inside with stones. When all was safe within, Éomer turned. "I thank you, Gimli, son of Gloin," he said. "I did not know that you were with us in the sortie, but oft the unbidden guest proves the best company. How came you here?" "I followed you to shake off sleep," said Gimli. "But I looked on the hillmen, and they seemed overlarge for me, so I sat beside a stone to see your sword play." I shall not find it easy to repay you, said Eomer. There may be a chance ere the night is over, laughed the dwarf, but I am content. Till now I have hewn naught but wood since I left Moria. Axes of the dwarves upon you indeed. Time Lord Guy, are you still there? Yeah, well, you know what? I'm going to assume that's him. I don't think nobody else messaged me, so I'm just going to send that to him so I don't have to worry about it. All right, I sent you your game. So enjoy that. As a matter of fact, let me know how it is, because I have no idea. Okay, let's continue here. Axes of the dwarves upon you. Exactly, yes. All right, let's see. Where were we? All very exciting stuff, right? The sky now was quickly clearing up and the sinking moon was shining brightly, but the light brought little hope to the riders of the mark. The enemy before them seemed to have grown rather than diminished, and still more were pressing up from the valley through the breach. The sortie upon the rock gained only a brief respite. The assault on the gates was redoubled. Against the deeping wall the hosts of Isengard roared like a sea. Orcs and hillmen swarmed about its feet from end to end. Ropes with grappling hooks were hurled over the parapet faster than men could cut them or fling them back. Hundreds of long ladders were lifted up. Many were cast down in ruin, but many more replaced them, and the orcs sprang up them like apes in the dark forests of the south. Before the wall's foot, the dead and broken were piled like shingle in a storm. Ever higher rose the hideous mounds, and still the enemy came on. The men of Rohan grew weary. All their arrows were spent, and every shaft was shot. Their swords were notched, and their shields were riven. 3 times Aragorn and Eomer rallied them, and 3 times Anduril flamed in a desperate charge that drove the enemy from the wall. Then a clamour arose in the deep behind. Orcs had crept like rats through the culvert through which the stream flowed out. There they had gathered in the shadow of the cliffs until the assault above was hottest, and nearly all of the men in the defence had rushed to the wall's top. Then they sprang out. Already some had passed into the jaws of the deep, and were among the horses, fighting with the guards. Down from the wall leapt Gimli with a fierce cry that echoed in the cliffs, "Khazad! Khazad!" He soon had work enough. "Aye, oi!" he shouted. "The orcs are behind the wall, aye, oi! Come, Legolas, there are enough for both of us, Khazad and Menu!" Gamling the Old looked down from the Hornburg, hearing the great voice of the dwarf and all the tumult. "The orcs are in the deep," he cried. "Helm! Helm! Forth Helmingus!" he shouted as he leaped down the stair from the rock with many men of the Westfold at his back. Their onset was fierce and sudden, and the orcs gave way before them. Ere long they were hemmed in the narrows of the gorge, and all were slain or driven shrieking into the chasm of the deep, too far before the guardians of the hidden caves. 21! cried Gimli. He hewed a 2-handed stroke, and laid the last orc behind his feet. "Now my cat passes Master Legolas again." "We must stop this rat-hole," said Gamling. "Dwarves are said to be cunning folk with stone. Lend us your aid, master." We do not shape stone with battle-axes, nor with our fingernails," said Gimli. "But I will help as I may." They gathered such small boulders and broken stones as they could find on hand, and under Gimli's direction the Westfold men blocked up the inner end of the culvert, until only a narrow outlet remained. Then the deeping stream, swollen by the rain, churned and fretted in its choked path, and spread slowly in cold pools from cliff to cliff. "It will be drier above," said Gimli. "Come, Gamling, let us see how things go on the wall." He climbed up and found Legolas beside Aragorn and Eomer. The elf was whetting his long knife. There was for a while a lull in the assault, since the attempt to break in through the culvert had been foiled. 21, said Gimli. "Good," said Legolas, "but my count is now 24. It has been knife work up here." Eomer and Aragorn leant wearily on their swords. Away on the left, the crash and clamour of the battle on the rock rose loud again. But the Hornburg still held fast like an island in the sea. Its gates lay in ruin, but over the barricade of beams and stones within no enemy as yet has passed. Aragorn looked at the pale stars and at the moon, now sloping behind the western hills that enclose the valley. "This is a night as long as years," he said. "How long will the day tarry?"
Dawn is not far off, said Gamling, who had now climbed up beside him. But Dawn will not help us, I fear. Yet Dawn is ever the hope of men, said Aragorn. But these creatures of Isengard, these half-orcs and goblin men, and the foul craft of Saruman hath bred, they will not quail before the sun, said Gamling. And neither will the wild men of the hills. Do you not hear their voices? I hear them, said Eomer, but they are only the scream of birds and the bellowing of beasts to my ears. Yet there are many that cry in the Dunland tongue, said Gamling. I know that tongue is an ancient speech of men, and once was spoken in many western valleys of the Mark. Hark, they hate us, and they are glad, for our doom seems certain to them. The king, they cried, we will take their king. Death to the Forgoyle, death to the Strawheads, death to the robbers of the north. Such names they have for us. Not in a 1,000 years have they forgotten their grievance that the lords of Gondor gave the Mark to Eorl the Young, and made alliance with him. That old hatred Saruman has inflamed. They are fierce folk when roused. They will not give way now for dusk or dawn till Theoden is taken, or they themselves are slain. Nonetheless, day will bring hope to me, said Aragorn. Is it not said that no foe has ever taken the Hornburg if men defended it? So the minstrels say, said Eomer. Then let us defend it, and hope, said Aragorn. I have to stop. I want to talk about something that Aragorn said, but also just, thirsty. Yeah, the friendly rivalry that we see between Legolas and Gimli is very interesting. It's probably the most interesting thing about Legolas, come to think of it. Now, Aragorn said something interesting here. He said, yet dawn is ever the hope of men. And I think this is really, really important. Now, Gamling is sort of interpreting this as saying that men can fight in the daytime and can travel in the daytime. They're not bothered by the sun or anything like that. Whereas orcs are traditionally really, really bothered by sunlight. And when we talked about the whole Balrog thing earlier, before we started our reading, I talked about the sun being, in the world of Tolkien, not just a big flame, but specifically a holy flame, and that's why it is anathema to these creatures of darkness. And of course, Gamling has the argument that, a lot of these guys are Uruk-hai or half-orcs. They have enough mannish blood in them that the sun isn't going to bother them. And also, a lot of them are men. There are the Dunlendings, the Hillmen. He alludes to the fact that they feel that they were displaced by the Rohirrim, referring to them as strawheads, but also as, robbers of the north, because the men of Rohan, the Rohirrim, they were not always called the Rohirrim. They were once called the Eotheod. And the Eotheod were Northmen. They lived in Rovanion, which is a lot of the Hobbit took place there. It's basically everything in the north that is to the east of the Misty Mountains. And praise the sun. I'm going to talk about Morgoth and the sun in just a bit. So you brought up a good point. I'm going to talk about that, I promise. But I see another instance of, it's not just about the sun being holy and everything, but he says that sun has ever been the hope of men. He's not saying sun has ever been the hope of the children of Iluvatar. He's not saying that the sun has ever been the hope of the forces of good. He's saying that the sun has always been the hope specifically of men. And the reason is because the timing of the first sunrise was also at the same time as the first awakening of men. So while the elves, who were the first children of Iluvatar, awoke in the darkness of Middle-earth with only the stars to see by, men, we came into being with the sun. Now, Morgoth really has a whole complicated relationship with the sun. Because the sun is specifically, in the Silmarillion, it's described as being the last fruit of the great tree Lorelin the Gold. And there were two trees of Valinor. There was Lorelin the Gold and Telperion the Silver.
And the moon is the last flower of Telperion the Silver. And these were saved from the trees as they were dying. Morgoth stabbed these trees with this giant spear. And then Ungoliant came and drank up all the light that flowed out of them and all the water in the basin that fed them. And they withered and they died. And the Valar managed to save one fruit from Laurelin the Gold and one flower from Telperion the Silver. And Aule, who is the craftsman of the Valar, he made these containers for these very bright celestial-style objects. And then they were hollowed by Varda, and they were put into the sky as the sun and the moon. But they are steered by other angels, two Maya. The Maya include Tilion, who holds the moon, and Arian, who holds the sun. Now, Arian is interesting because she was the object of desire for Morgoth. Morgoth has this attraction, this deep, primal attraction to light. One of the first things he did before the world was created was he tried to find himself a wife when he was Melkor, the greatest, the mightiest of the angels. And he was attracted to Varda. She was the brightest of all the angels. She was she's the mother of the stars, and she spurned him because she could see the darkness within him, and of course he was not too happy with that, and especially I think really annoyed with the fact that she married his brother, Manwë. So he really doesn't like that. And the next lady that he tried to ask out was Arian. She's said to be so beautiful that she was literally hard to look at, and she was incredibly radiant. And she was a spirit of fire, and she was sort of the answer to what would a Balrog be if it wasn't a Balrog. Like if it wasn't fallen, if it was pure and holy, Arian's the answer to that. And in some versions of the tale that are in the Book of Lost Tales, Morgoth actually attempted to force himself on Arian, and she burned him with her holy fire, which left him in pain, everlasting, and it was the explanation to why Morgoth had ashen gray skin, because he was burned by Arian. So literally, he has been burned by the sun, or at least the angel that carries the sun through the sky. And the thing about light is that he wants to possess it. He wants to own it. He doesn't want it to be something that benefits everybody. He wanted the Silmarils because they were bright and radiant and shiny. They weren't particularly powerful. They didn't really do anything. But he wanted to keep them on his crown. He cast down the two lamps. He cast down the two trees. But the sun really daunts him because he can't reach it. It's beyond him. He's earthbound. Is it true that Arian was the only Maya that did not, a fire Maya that did not become a Balrog? It's not true simply because there's not enough information about the Maiar. If you read the second chapter of the Silmarillion, which is called the Valaquenta, which basically means the spoken tale of the powers, the Valar. There is a section on the Maiar, and they say, hey, look, there's a few Maiar that we know the names of, but we don't know how many there are. We don't know what most of them look like. We don't really know anything about them other than that they are the same order of angels as the Valar, just on a lower level of majesty, and that they generally serve the Valar, and that they generally walk among us unseen and unsensed, so to speak. So we don't know how many of these fiery Maiar there were, and we don't know how many of them became Balrogs, because we don't even really know how many Balrogs there were. Tolkien was wavering in a number between 3 and 7. It may have been as few as 3. It may have been as many as 7. We don't really know. And we don't know how many other fire spirits there were. Some people even say that Sauron himself is a fire spirit. So you would say that if that's true, that he did not become a Balrog. He was still fallen, but at a later point. The Balrogs were Morgoth's first recruits. They fell instantly, whereas Sauron, it was a bit later. There was quite a while where he was Myron the Admirable before he started acting funny. But good question though. He's afraid of the sun. He's attracted to the sun. He hates the sun. There's a whole complicated sort of psychosensual thing going on with Morgoth. He's just got a complicated relationship with light in general, especially if it's holy light. So let's continue here. Men awoke with the sun. That's why Aragorn said that dawn is ever the hope of man. Even as they spoke, there came a blare of trumpets. Then there was a crash and a flash of flame and smoke. The waters of the deeping stream poured out hissing and foaming, and they were choked no longer. A gaping hole was blasted in the wall. A host of dark shapes poured in. "Devilry of Saruman!" cried Aragorn. "They have crept up the culvert again while we talked, and they have lit the fire of Orthanc beneath our feet. Elendil! Elendil!" he shouted as he leaped down into the breach. But even as he did so, 100 ladders were raised against the battlements. Over the wall and under the wall, the last assault came sweeping like a dark wave upon a hill of sand. The defense was swept away. Some of the riders were driven back further and further into the deep, falling and fighting as they gave way step by step towards the caves. Others cut their way back towards the citadel. A broad stairway climbed from the deep up to the rock and the rear gate of the Hornburg. Near the bottom stood Aragorn. In his hand steel Anduril gleamed, and the terror of the sword for a while held back the enemy, as one by one all who could gain the stair passed up toward the gate. Behind on the upper steps knelt Legolas. His bow was bent, but one gleamed arrow was all that he had left, and he peered out now, ready to shoot the first orc that should dare approach the stair. All who can now have got safe within, Aragorn, he called. Come back. Aragorn turned and sped up the stair, but as he ran he stumbled in his weariness. At once his enemies leaped forward. Up came the orcs, yelling, with their long arms stretching out to seize him. The foremost fell with Legolas's last arrow in his throat, but the rest sprang over him. Then a great boulder, cast from the outer wall above, crashed down upon the stair, and hurled them back into the deep. Aragorn gained the door, and swiftly it clanged in behind him. "Things go ill, my friends," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow with his arm. "Ill enough," said Legolas, "but not yet hopeless, while we still have you with us. Where is Gimli?" "I do not know," said Aragorn. "I last saw him fighting on the ground behind the wall, but the enemy swept us apart." "Alas, that is evil news," said Legolas. "He is stout and strong," said Aragorn. "Let us hope that he will escape back to the caves. There he would be safe for a while, safer than we. Such a refuge would be to the liking of a dwarf." "That must be my hope," said Legolas, "but I wish now that he had come this way. I desire to tell Master Gimli that my tale is now 39. "If he wins back to the caves, he will pass your count again," laughed Aragorn. "Never did I see an axe so wielded." "I must go and seek some arrows," said Legolas. "Would that this night would end, and I could have better light for shooting." Aragorn now passed into the citadel. There, to his dismay, he learned that Éomer had not reached the Hornburg. "Nay, he did not come to the rocks," said one of the Westfold men. "I last saw him gathering men about him and fighting in the mouth of the deep. Gamling was with him and the dwarf, but I could not come to them." Aragorn strode on through the inner court and mounted to a high chamber in the tower. There stood the king, dark against a narrow window, looking out upon the vale. "What is the news, Aragorn?" he said. "The deeping wall is taken, lord, and all the defence swept away. But many have escaped hither to the rock." "Is Éomer here?" "No, lord, but many of your men retreated into the deep, and some say that Éomer was amongst them. In the narrows they may hold back the enemy and come within the caves. What hope they may have then, I do not know.
More than we. Good provision, it is said, and the air is wholesome there because of the outlets through fissures in the rock far above. None can force an entrance against determined men. They may hold out long. But the orcs have brought a devilry from Orthanc, said Aragorn. They have a blasting fire, and with it they took the wall. If they can come in the caves, they may seal up those that are inside. But now we must turn all our thought to our own defence. I fret in this prison, said Theoden. If I could scent a spear and rest, riding before my men upon the field, maybe I could have felt again the joy of battle, and so ended. But I serve little purpose here. Here at least you are guarded in the strongest fastness of the mark, said Aragorn. More hope we have to defend you in this Hornburg than in Edoras, or even at Dunharrow in the mountains. It is said that the Hornburg has never fallen to assault, said Theoden. But now my heart is doubtful. The world changes, and all that once was strong now proves unsure. How shall any tower withstand such numbers and such reckless hate? Had I known that the strength of Isengard was grown so great, maybe I should not so rashly have ridden forth to meet it, for all the arts of Gandalf. His counsel seems now not so good as it did under the morning sun. Do not judge the counsel of Gandalf until all is over, Lord, said Aragorn. The end will not take long, said the king. But I will not end here, taken like an old badger in a trap. Snowmane and Hasafel, the horses of my guard, are in the inner court. When dawn comes, I will bid men sound helm's horn, and I will ride forth. Will you ride with me then, son of Arathorn? Maybe we shall cleave a road, or make such an end as will be worth a song, if any be left to sing of us hereafter. I will ride with you, said Aragorn. Taking his leave, he returned to the walls and passed round all the circuit, enheartening the men, and lending aid wherever the assault was hot. Legolas went with him. Blasts of fire leaped up from below, shaking the stones. Grappling hooks were hurled and ladders raised. Again and again the orcs gained the summit of the outer wall, and again the defenders cast them down. Exactly. Now for wrath, now for a red dawn. Hold on one moment, guys. I just need to catch my breath. This section is quite intense. Can't seem to get these side by side like I want. I guess I could just do it like that. Oh, that's better. Let's do it like that. Okay. Okay, let's continue. There's actually not a lot left in the chapter here. What do you mean, and we're back? Did something happen that I'm not aware of, Moogle? Moogle is saying, and we're back on the Twitch stream. Did something happen that I'm not aware of? Did it go down or something? The YouTube stream has been working. No? Okay. Oh, don't scare me like that, Moogle. Okay, and we're back. Okay, let's get back to it. At last Aragorn stood above the great gates, heedless of the darts of the enemy. As he looked forth, he saw the eastern sky grow pale. Then he raised his empty hand, palm outward, in token of parley. The orcs yelled and jeered. Come down, they cried. If you wish to speak to us, come down. Bring out your king. We are the fighting Uruk-hai. We will fetch him from his hole if he does not come. Bring out your skulking king. The king stays or comes at his own will, said Aragorn. Then what are you doing here? They answered. Why do you look out? Do you wish to see the greatness of our army? We are the fighting Uruk-hai. I looked out to see the dawn, said Aragorn. What of the dawn? They jeered. We are the Uruk-hai. We do not stop the fight for night or day, for fair weather or for storm. We come to kill by sun or moon. What of the dawn? None knows what the new day shall bring him, said Aragorn. Get you gone ere it turn to your evil. Get down, or we will shoot you from the wall, they cried. This is no parley. You have nothing to say. "I still have this to say," answered Aragorn. "No enemy has taken the Hornburg. Depart, or not one of you will be spared. Not one will be left alive to take back tidings to the north. You do not know your peril." So great a power and royalty was revealed in Aragorn as he stood there alone above the ruined gates before the host of his enemies, that many of the wild men paused and looked back over their shoulders to the valley, and some looked up doubtfully at the sky. But the orcs laughed with loud voices, and a hail of darts and arrows whistled over the wall as Aragorn leaped down. There was a roar and a blast of fire. The archway of the gate above which he had stood a moment before crumbled and crashed in smoke and dust. The barricade was scattered as if by thunderbolt. Aragorn ran to the king's tower. But even as the gate fell and the orcs about it yelled, preparing to charge, a murmur arose behind them, like a wind in the distance. And it grew to a clamour of many voices crying strange news in the dawn. The orcs upon the rock, hearing the rumour of dismay, wavered and looked back. And then, sudden and terrible, from the tower above, the sound of the great horn of Helm rang out. All that heard the sound trembled. Many of the orcs cast themselves on their faces and covered their ears with their claws. Back from the deep the echoes came, blast upon blast, as if on every cliff and hill a mighty herald stood. But on the walls men looked up, listening with wonder, for the echoes did not die. Ever the horn blasts wound on among the hills. Nearer now and louder they answered one to another, blowing fierce and free. "Helm! Helm!" the riders shouted. "Helm is arisen and comes back to war! Helm for Theoden king!" And with that shout the king came. His horse was white as snow, golden was his shield, and his spear was long. At his right hand was Aragorn, Elendil's heir. Behind him rode the lords of the house of Eorl the Young. Light sprang in the sky. Night departed. "For Theolingus!" With a cry and a great noise they charged. Down from the gates they roared, over the causeway they swept, and they drove through the hosts of Isengard as a wind among the grass. Behind them from the deep came the stern cries of men issuing from the cave, driving forth the enemy. Out poured all the men that were left upon the rock, and ever the sound of blowing horns echoed in the hills. On they rode, the king and his companions. Captains and champions fell or fled before them. Neither orc nor men withstood them. Their backs were to their swords, and spears to the riders, and their faces to the valley. They cried and wailed, for fear and great wonder had come upon them with the rising of the day. So King Theoden rode from Helm's Gate, and clove his path to the great dike. There the company halted. Light grew bright about them. Shafts of the sun flared above eastern hills and glimmered on their spears. But they sat silent on their horses, and they gazed down upon the deeping coombe. The land had changed. Where before the green dale had lain, its grassy slopes lapping and ever-mounting hills, there now a forest loomed. Great trees, bare and silent, stood, rank on rank, with tangled bough and hoary head. Their twisted roots were buried in the long green grass. Darkness was under them. Between the dike and the eaves of that nameless wood, only 2 open furlongs lay. There now cowered the proud hosts of Saruman, in terror of the king and in terror of the trees. They streamed down from Helm's Gate until all above the dike was empty of them, but before it they were packed like swarming flies. Vainly they crawled and clambered about the walls of the coombe, seeking to escape. Upon the east too sheer and stony was the valley's side. Upon the left from the west their final doom approached. There suddenly upon a ridge appeared a rider, clad in white, shining in the rising sun. Over the low hills the horns were sounding. Behind him, hastening down the long slopes, were 1,000 men on foot. Their swords were in their hands. Amid them strode a man tall and strong. His shield was red. As he came down to the valley's brink, he set to his lips a great black horn and blew a ringing blast. "Erkenbrand!" the riders shouted. "Erkenbrand!" "Behold the white rider!" cried Aragorn. "Gandalf has come again." "Mithrandir! Mithrandir!" said Legolas. "This is wizardry indeed. Come, I would look out on this forest ere the spell changes." The hosts of Isengard roared, swaying this way and that, turning from fear to fear. Again the horn sounded from the tower. Down through the breach of the dike charged the king's company. Down from the hills leaped Erkenbrand, lord of the Westfold. Down leaped Shadowfax like a deer that runs sure-footed in the mountains. The white rider was upon them, and the terror of his coming filled the enemy with madness. The wild men fell on their faces before him. The orcs reeled and screamed and cast aside both sword and spear. Like a black smoke driven by a mounting wind they fled. Wailing they passed under the waiting shadow of the trees, and from that shadow none ever came again.
I have come back to you now with the turn of the tide, for the tide has turned indeed.
That's what he said in the forest. Whew. Helm's Deep is there's not a lot to say lore-wise. I mean, we talked about the rising of the sun and everything, and we talked about the history of Helm's Deep and, you know, the War of the Rohirrim. But, you know, other than that, it's just a lot of action, and it's exhausting in a good way, in a good sort of way. Almost a stressful read, you would say, you know? Almost a stressful read. One of the greatest battle scenes ever written. Although I think the one in The Return of the King, the battle for the Pelennor Fields, is perhaps even better in the fact that there's just so many things going on there, you know? But it's really interesting that, you know, we're getting this sort of... a lot of obfuscation happening where Theoden is going on what he thinks may be his very last charge, you know, and they're just thinking that he's Helm Hammerhand come back from the dead, you know, and of course there is the local legend that Helm does come back from the dead to fight orcs around this area. Now, it's not true, of course, but it's a local legend, so, you know, he gets to play into that. Legolas is interesting here because he hears, hey, this forest sprung up out of nowhere, and he says he wants to see it before the spell is changed. And with his exact words there, which is, let's see, Mithrandir, this is wizardry indeed. Come, I will look on this forest ere the spell changes. He seems to think that this forest out of nowhere is something that Gandalf cooked up. And we're going to learn in the next chapter that Gandalf had nothing to do with it, didn't even know that it was happening ahead of time. But he is, of course, in charge of getting Erkenbrand there, and the Lord of the Westfold and all his men. You know, so the forest is really interesting. We're going to find out more about that. That's, of course, a forest of Huorns. The Ents have successfully taken Isengard, as we will learn, and now they have brought these Huorns, which are trees that have become Entish, and they said that the orcs go into the trees, none ever come out. It's over for them. And it's interesting, not only did, like Walter said, the tides turned, but swiftly. And, and really it's almost like Aragorn sort of manifested his victory there. He went up onto the top of the wall and he spoke to the Uruk-hai, and he told them surrender, and they're thinking, this is sort of like that line from Star Wars, in our moment of triumph. No, you're thinking you're doing good, you're not doing so good, and then he just barely gets off the wall before they blast it into smithereens, and he's saying, who knows what might happen that will bring you to evil? Who knows where your doom lays? And I'm telling you, it's going to be over in like a minute. And then it is. And Aragorn is really showing here that he is a lot like Gandalf in the way that he operates primarily on faith. Gandalf operates on faith many times throughout the entirety of the story. Aragorn here, yeah. I think when he said that, though, because he was telling them, get out of here. But they generally don't spare orcs, but I think he was mainly talking to the hillmen there, because they're a little bit more to be reasoned with. And what's interesting that we will learn about the men of Dunland, of course, they have this hatred of Rohan dating back to a very, very old, conflict that they feel that Gondor
took land that they were living in and gave it to these guys. They were never told that they had to leave or anything, but they culturally clashed with the Eothiad, and they wound up just, going to the north to live in the land that we now call Dunland. But a lot of it was just they have these legends about Rohan, and a lot of it was stoked by Saruman himself. Saruman told them about how evil Rohan is, about how cruel they are, and you better fight to the death, because if they capture you, or if you surrender to them, they're going to torture you. And of course that's not true, and they're actually really surprised to see how kind the Rohirrim are in victory, which we're going to get into in the next chapter. Now, looking at the time here, we got through that pretty quickly. The next chapter is The Road to Isengard, and it's not a particularly long chapter, so we can get through that today for sure. I'm going to take a brief break to go to the bathroom, and then we're going to continue. But it's just like I said, Helm's Deep is not something that needs to be discussed a lot. There's not a lot of deep lore to get into. A lot of it is covered in the appendix, which we're going to get to, eventually. But it's just so fun. It's just a fun chapter. It's action-packed. It's got some great moments. We will find out the results of the Legolas and Gimli contest there, But I'll be right back, guys. Let's go over to here. I just need to go to the bathroom, and I'll be right back. Now what Moogle said is interesting. Moogle said a very simple thing here. I can picture it. And that's another thing. Oh, wrong way. That's another thing that we can say about the Helm's Deep chapter here, is that it is an incredibly visual chapter, right? Everything is a description of... you get the overall sort of, this is what the layout is, this is where everything is, and then this is what's happening, right? And then it becomes very rapid pace. And then this happened, and then that happened, and suddenly this, and then a rock came smashing down, and, it's all exciting stuff. We're going to move on here to Chapter 8, The Road to Isengard. So it was that in the light of a fair morning, King Theoden and Gandalf the White Rider met again upon the green grass beside the deeping stream. There was also Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and Legolas the Elf, and Erkenbrand of Westfold, and the lords of the Golden House. About them were gathered the Rohirrim, the riders of the Mark. Wonder overcame their joy in victory, and their eyes were turned toward the wood. Suddenly there was a great shout, and down from the dike came those who had been driven back into the deep.
there came Gamling the Old, and Eomer son of Eomund, and beside them walked Gimli the dwarf. He had no helm, and about his head was a linen band stained with blood, but his voice was loud and strong. 42, Master Legolas, he cried. Alas, my axe is notched. The 42nd had an iron collar on his neck. How was it with you? You have passed my score by 1, answered Legolas. But I do not grudge you the game. So glad am I to see you on your legs. Greetings from Tol Eressëa. Hi, Matthew. How's it going? We just started the road to Isengard, if you're wondering where we are. Welcome, Eomer, sister son, said Theoden. Now that I see you safe, I am glad indeed. Hail, Lord of the Mark, said Eomer. The dark night is past and day has come again, but the day has brought strange tidings. He turned and gazed in wonder, first at the wood and then at Gandalf. Once more you come in the hour of need unlooked for, he said. Unlooked for, said Gandalf. I said that I would return and meet you here. But you did not name the hour, nor foretell the manner of your coming. Strange help you bring. You are mighty in wizardry, Gandalf the White. That may be, but if so, I have not shown it yet. I have but given good counsel in peril, and made use of the speed of Shadowfax. Your own valour has done more in the stout legs of the Westfold men marching through the night. Then they all gazed at Gandalf with still greater wonder. Some glanced darkly at the wood, and passed their hands over their brows, as if they thought their eyes now saw otherwise than his. Gandalf laughed long and merrily. The trees, he said. Nay, I see the wood as plainly as you do, but that is no deed of mine. It is a thing beyond the counsel of the wise. Better than my design, and better even than my hope, the event has proved. Then if not yours, whose is the wizardry? Said Theoden. Not Saruman's, that is plain. Is there some mightier sage of whom we have yet to learn? It is not wizardry, but a power far older, said Gandalf. A power that walked the earth ere elf sang or hammer rang, ere iron was found or tree was hewn, when young was mountain unto noon, ere ring was made or wrought was woe, it walked the forests long ago. I'm sorry, I just have to pause. Praise the sun, that is hilarious. The orcs got their swords on Timu. That's... I guess, Isengard is sort of the Timu of Middle-earth, isn't it? There. Saruman ordered them on Timu en masse, and that's all he could afford to. More like he was too cheap to get anything better, right? All right, let us continue here. And what may be the answer to your riddle? Said Theoden. If you would learn that, you should come with me to Isengard, answered Gandalf. To Isengard, they cried. Yes, said Gandalf. I shall return to Isengard, and those who will may come with me. There we may see strange things. But there are not men enough in the mark, not if they were all gathered together and healed of wounds and weariness to assault the stronghold of Saruman, said Theoden. Nevertheless, to Isengard I go, said Gandalf. I shall not stay there long. My way lies now eastward. Look for me in Erebus ere the waning of the moon. Nay, said Theoden. In the dark hour before dawn I doubted, but we will not part now. I will come with you, if that is your counsel. So what he's referring to here is he said earlier, maybe that Gandalf was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have done this, And now he's like, no. This guy's legit. He's the real deal, Old Sharku disappointing his children with cheap stuff. Yeah. What's crazy is that they liked him enough to call him Sharku, which is the closest that an orc would come to referring to someone as daddy, so to speak. Hold on, I'm trying to get this. There we go. I was trying to make the chat a little bit bigger. There we go. Because I'm in the reclined position here. All right, let's continue here. Where was I? Here we are. I wish to speak with Saruman as soon as may be now, said Gandalf. And since he has done you great injury, it would be fitting if you were there. But how soon and how swiftly will you ride?" "My men are weary with battle," said the king, "and I am weary also, for I have ridden far and slept little. Alas, my old age is not feigned, nor due only to the whisperings of worm tongue. It is an ill that no leech can wholly cure, not even Gandalf." "Then let all who are to ride with me rest now," said Gandalf. "We will journey under the shadow of evening. It is as well, for it is my counsel that our comings and goings should be as secret as may be henceforth. But do not command many men to go with you, Theoden. We go to a parley, not to a fight." The king then chose men that were unhurt and had swift horses, and he sent them forth with tidings of the victory into every vale of the Mark, and they bore his summons also, bidding all men, young and old, to come in haste to Edoras. There the lord of the Mark would hold an assembly of all that could bear arms on the second day after the full moon. To ride with him to Isengard the king chose Eomer and 20 men of his household. With Gandalf would go Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. In spite of his hurt, the dwarf would not stay behind. "It was only a feeble blow, and the cap turned it," he said. "He would take more than such an orc scratch to keep me back." "I will tend it while you rest," said Aragorn. The king now returned to the Hornburg and slept, such a sleep of quiet as he had not known for many years, and the remainder of his chosen company rested also. But the others, all that were not hurt or wounded, began a great labour, for many had fallen in the battle and lay dead upon the field or in the deep. No orcs remained alive, their bodies were uncounted, but a great many of the hillmen had given themselves up, and were afraid, and cried for mercy. The men of the Mark took their weapons from them, and set them to work. "Help now to repair the evil in which you have joined," said Erkenbrand, "and afterwards you shall take an oath to never again pass the fords of Isen in arms, nor to march with the enemies of men, and then you shall go free back to your land, for you have been deluded by Saruman. Many of you have got death as the reward for your trust in him. But had you conquered, little better would your wages have been." Let's pause here and talk about this. This is interesting. So Erkenbrand is telling them, we're going to take your weapons, and you're basically going to swear an oath. And we know how oaths are very, very powerful in this world. You swear an oath, you can't break it. Even if you try to, it gnaws at you. There's a whole book about that. But anyway, and we're going to talk about that more when we get to, the past of the dead and such. But anyway, what's really interesting here is, he tells them, a lot of you died, and you know what? Had you won, you probably weren't going to survive anyway. Saruman wasn't going to let you live after all that nonsense, And what's really interesting here is, these men of Dunland are just like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah. Let's continue here. Yep, the Oath of Feanor. Death for him, death for his sons, and then essentially an eternity in Mandos afterwards, That's tough, right? The men of Dunland were amazed, for Saruman had told them the men of Rohan were cruel, and burned their captives alive. In the midst of the field before the Hornburg 2 mounds were raised, and beneath them were laid all the riders of the Mark who fell in the defence, those of the East Dales upon one side, and those of the Westfold upon the other. In a grave alone, under the shadow of the Hornburg, lay Hama, captain of the king's guard. He fell before the gate. The orcs were piled in great heaps away from the mounds of men, not far from the eaves of the forest, and the people were troubled in their minds, for the heaps of carrion were too great for burial or for burning. They had little wood for firing, and none would have dared to take an axe to the strange trees, even if Gandalf had not warned them to not hurt neither bark nor bough at their great peril. "Let the orcs lie," said Gandalf. "The morning may bring new counsel." In the afternoon, just to answer you, though, Maethros may have, done some amazing things, but he was still a really terrible person, and it still ended really, really bad for him, So it was really just a lesson learned about the power of oaths, In the afternoon, the king's company prepared to depart,
The work of burial was then but beginning, and Theoden mourned for the loss of Hama his captain, and cast the first earth upon his grave. "Great injury indeed has Saruman done to me in all this land," he said, "and I will remember it when we meet." The sun was already drawing near the hills upon the west of the Coombe, when at last Theoden and Gandalf and all their companions rode down from the dike. Behind them were gathered a great host, both of the riders and of the people of Westfold, old and young, women and children, who had come out of the caves. A song of victory they sang with clear voices, and then they fell silent, wondering what would chance, for their eyes were on the trees, and they feared them. The riders came to the woods, and they halted, horse and man, who were unwilling to pass in. The trees were grey and menacing, and a shadow or a mist was about them. The ends of their long, sweeping boughs hung down like searching fingers. Their roots stood up from the ground like the limbs of strange monsters, and dark caverns opened beneath them. But Gandalf went forward, leading the company, and where the road from the Hornburg met the trees, they saw now an opening like an arched gate under mighty boughs. And through it Gandalf passed, and they followed him. Then to their amazement they found that the road ran on, and the deeping stream beside it, and the sky was open above and full of golden light. But on either side the great aisles of the wood were already wrapped in dusk, stretching away to impenetrable shadows. And there they heard the creaking and groaning of boughs, and far cries, and a rumour of wordless voices murmuring angrily. No orc or other living creature could be seen. Legolas and Gimli were now riding together upon one horse, and they kept close beside Gandalf, for Gimli was afraid of the wood. It is hot in here," said Legolas to Gandalf. "I feel a great wrath around me. Do you not feel the air throb in your ears?" "Yes," said Gandalf. "What has become of the miserable orcs?" said Legolas. "That, I think, no one will ever know," said Gandalf. They rode in silence for a while, but Legolas was ever glancing from side to side, and would often have halted to listen to the sounds of the wood if Gimli had allowed it. "These are the strangest trees that I ever saw," he said, "and I have seen many an oak grow from acorn to ruinous age. I wish there were leisure now to walk among them. They have voices, and in time I might come to understand their thought." "No, no," said Gimli. "Let us leave them. I guess their thought already. Hatred of all that go on two legs, and their speech is of crushing and strangling." "Not of all that go on two legs," said Legolas. "There I think you are wrong. It is orcs that they hate, for they do not belong here, and know little of elves and men. Far away are the valleys where they sprang, from the deep dales of Fangorn, Gimli. That is whence they come, I guess." "And that is the most perilous wood in Middle-earth," said Gimli. "I should be grateful for the part they have played, but I do not love them. You may think them wonderful, but I have seen a greater wonder in this land, more beautiful than any grove or glade that ever grew. My heart is still full of it." "Strange are the ways of men, Legolas. Here they have one of the marvels of the northern world. And what do they say of it? Caves, they say. Caves, holes to fly to in times of war, to store fodder in. My good Legolas, do you not know that the caves of Helm's Deep are vast and beautiful? There would be an endless pilgrimage of dwarves merely to gaze at them, if such things were known to be. Aye, indeed, they would pay pure gold for a brief glance." "And I would give gold to be excused," said Legolas, "and double to be let out if I strayed in." "You have not seen, so I forgive your jest," said Gimli. "But you speak like a fool. Do you think those holes are fair where your king dwells under the hill in Mirkwood, and dwarves helped in their making long ago? They are but hovels compared with the caverns I have seen here, immeasurable holes filled with an everlasting music of water that tinkles into pools as fair as Keled Zaram in the starlight. And, Legolas, when the torches are kindled, and men walk on sandy floors under the echoing domes, then, Legolas, gems and crystals and veins of precious ore
glint in the polished walls, and the living hands of Queen Galadriel. They are columns of white and saffron and dawn rose, Legolas, fluted and twisted into dreamlike forms. They spring up from many-coloured floors to meet the glistening pendants of the roof, wings, ropes, curtains fine as frozen clouds, spears, banners, pinnacles of suspended palaces. Still lakes mirror them. A glimmering world looks up from the dark pools covered with clear grass. Cities, such as the mind of Durin could scarce have imagined in his sleep, stretch on through avenues and pillared courts, or onto the dark recesses where no light can come, and plink, a silver drop falls, and the round wrinkles in the glass make all the towers bend and waver, like weeds and corals into a grotto of the sea. Then evening comes, they fade and twinkle out, the torches pass on into another chamber and another dream. There is chamber after chamber, Legolas, hall opening out of hall, dome after dome, stair beyond stair, and still the winding paths lead on into the mountainous heart. Caves, the caverns of Helm's Deep, happy was the chance that drove me there. It makes me weep to leave them.
Then I shall wish you this fortune for your comfort, Gimli, said the elf, that you may come safe from war and return to see them again. But do not tell all your kindred. There seems little left for them to do from your account. Maybe the men of this land are wise to say little. One family of busy dwarves with hammer and chisel might mar more than they make.
No, you do not understand, said Gimli. No dwarf could be unmoved by such loveliness. None of Durin's race would mine those caves for stones or ore, not if diamonds and gold could be got there. Do you cut down groves of blossoming trees in the springtime for firewood? We would tend these glades of flowering stone, not quarry them. With cautious skill, tap by tap, a small chip of rock, and no more, perhaps in a whole anxious day. So we could work, and as the years went by, we should open up new ways and display far chambers that are still dark, glimpsed only as a void beyond fissures in the rock. And lights, Legolas, we should make lights, such lamps as once shone in Khazad-dûm. And when we wished, we would arrive away the night that has lain there since the hills were made. And when we desired rest, we would let the night return.
You move me, Gimli, said Legolas. I have never heard you speak like this before. Almost you make me regret that I have not seen these caves. Come, let us make this bargain. If we both return safe out of the perils that await us, we will journey for a while together. You shall visit Fangorn with me, and then I will come with you to see Helm's Deep.
That would not be the way of return that I should choose, said Gimli. But I will endure Fangorn, for if I have your promise to come back to the caves and share their wonder with me.
You have my promise, said Legolas. But alas, now we must leave behind both cave and wood for a while. See, we are coming to the end of the trees. How far is it to Isengard, Gandalf?
About 15 leagues as the crows of Saruman make it, said Gandalf. 5 from the mouth of Deeping Combe to the forge, and 10 more from there to the gates of Isengard. But we shall not ride all the way this night. And when we come here, what shall we see? Asked Gimli. You may know, but I cannot guess. I do not know myself for certain, answered the wizard. I was there at nightfall yesterday, but much may have happened since. Yet I think that you will not say that the journey was in vain, not though the glittering caves of Aglaron be left behind.
All right, let's talk about this. The Glittering Caves may be your favorite place in Middle-earth you'd love to visit. It would be up there. I get asked a lot about, like if you could live in Middle-earth, where would you live? And I always say, well, I would live in Lindon. You know, it's sort of this great place. It's at the sea, and you've got the dwarves to the north, the hobbits right there to the east, Dunland to the south. You know, it's just a great location, right? But to visit and see, the Glittering Caves. I mean, Gimli speaks about the Glittering Caves the way that a young lover may speak of a woman that he is enamored with. And he even does bring Galadriel into it as a metaphor. And it's interesting the way that, Legolas says, I've never heard you speak so much. This is the most that Gimli has ever talked, and of course, he has a great love for Galadriel. And just a few days ago, on my YouTube community tab, I had one of my quizzes where it was, which of the following things did Gimli not do after the events of the Return of the King? And the correct answer was that he did not participate in the restoration of Moria, and that was because that happened like about 50 years after he left Middle-earth. But one of the things that he did do was he founded a colony of dwarves in Rohan, and it was specifically in Anglarad, which is the Glittering Caves. And there's no doubt that he did it exactly here as he said he would, that they would only very carefully chip away at certain specific walls just to open up new chambers, and they were going to put lights in there and just make it even more beautiful. Because Legolas had this sort of like idea that and it's a very old idea, that dwarves are kind of harsh on the environment, and it goes back to the creation of the dwarves and the Ents in the Silmarillion, one of the latest chapters that was written, of Aule and Yavanna, which tells us about the dwarves and it tells us about the Ents. And the main concern that Yavanna had is that these dwarves were going to be another race that were going to be a blight on the environment, that they were going to cut down trees to use for wood. And she went to Manwë, and Manwë was sort of like, well, what is it that you want, really? And she said, because she created the trees, and she said, I would like my children to be appreciated for what they are and not as a resource. And so, the elves sort of think of it's interesting. The elves, they cut down trees too. It's not like they don't ever cut down trees, and they live in caves too. As was pointed out, Nargothrond was a big cave system that they essentially stole from the dwarves. And Gimli is right to point out that the dwarves helped the elves build the cave system that Legolas lives in Mirkwood. So, elves absolutely will live underground. They just don't prefer it. It's not their first choice, He would rather probably live in a place like Lothlorien, where they're in these tree houses and such. But anyway, it's really interesting, how much Gimli actually did. He did found that dwarven colony later. He did repair and strengthen the walls of Minas Tirith with Mithril. And he did sail to the west, being the first and only dwarf ever to do that. He didn't retake Moria because that happened a bit later. Now, Moogle had a question. Did it ever have dwarves getting drunk, like in some other fantasy lore? Well, it's interesting because there's just a lot of drinking in general in Tolkien's works. Everybody is always drinking beer and wine and mead and everything, and you don't usually hear of them drinking to excess. I mean, even though the hobbits are drinking beer like at every meal, and then in the evening they go to the pub and they drink more beer, But you don't often hear about people actually becoming drunk. The one exception was in The Hobbit, and it was actually an elf that became so drunk that he fell asleep, and that was how the dwarves and Bilbo were able to escape. Because they were able to take his keys. But yeah, basically they drink and they drink and they drink, and they usually don't get drunk from it, And Walter's right. Tolkien loved drinking. He loved eating. He loved smoking. He was just basically a man of simple pleasures, so to speak. Now, as for what you said about personally you'd love to live at Beorn's Hall, particularly when Beorn was around, that seems wonderful. The only reason that I wouldn't choose to do that is because I am rather carnivorous. I don't think that I could abide the vegetarian lifestyle that Beorn had, I don't know. For all I know, he was out there eating orcs and such. But if you notice, he has animals for friends. He doesn't slaughter animals. And when Bilbo and Gandalf and Thorin and all the other dwarves stayed at his hall, they only ever were described as eating honey and cream and mead and beer and bread. You know. So after a while, I'm going to need a cheeseburger. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to need tacos or something. You know what I mean? I just, after a while, it's like, hey, you got any sausage? Like, yeah, we'd ask that, But, yeah. All right, let's continue on here. You think that Beorn is serving Yavanna in some secret way? I think Radagast is serving Yavanna in some not-so-secret way. I think Beorn is essentially just Tolkien's way of sneaking Beowulf into the story. Even his name, Beorn, has the same exact meaning as Beowulf. So I think that's really what was going on there. All right, let's move on here. Oh, somehow the book became upside down. I don't know how that happened. Here we go. At last the company passed through the trees, and found that they had come to the bottom of the coombe, where the road from Helm's Deep branched, going one way east to Edoras and the other north to the fords of Isen. And they rode from under the eaves of the wood. Legolas halted and looked back with regret. Then he gave a sudden cry. "There are eyes," he said. "Eyes looking out from the shadows of the boughs. I never saw such eyes before." The others, surprised by his cry, halted and turned, but Legolas started to ride back. "No, no," cried Gimli. "Do as you please in your madness. But let me first get down from this horse. I wish to see no eyes." "Stay, Legolas Greenleaf," said Gandalf. "Do not go back into the wood, not yet. Now is not your time." Even as he spoke, there came forward out of the tree 3 strange shapes. As tall as trolls they were, 12 feet or more in height. Their strong bodies, stout as young trees, seemed to be clad with raiment or with hide of close-fitting grey and brown. Their limbs were long, and their hands had many fingers. Their hair was stiff, and their beards grey-green as moss. They gazed out with solemn eyes, but they were not looking at the riders. Their eyes were bent northwards. Suddenly they lifted their long hands to their mouths and sent forth ringing calls, clear as notes on a horn, but more musical and various. The calls were answered, and turning again the riders saw other creatures of the same kind approaching, striding through the grass. They came swiftly from the north, walking like wading herons in their gait, but not in their speed, for their legs and their long paces beat quicker than the heron's wings. The riders cried aloud in wonder, and some set their hands upon their sword hilts. "You need no weapons," said Gandalf. "These are but herdsmen. They are not enemies. Indeed, they are not concerned with us at all." So it seemed to be, for as he spoke, the tall creatures, without a glance at the riders, strode into the wood and vanished. "Herdsmen," said Theoden. "Where are their flocks? What are they, Gandalf? For it is plain that to you, at any rate, they are not strange." "They are the shepherds of the trees," answered Gandalf. "It is so long since you listened to the tales by the... Is it so long that you've listened to tales by the fireside? There are children in your land who, out of the twisted threads of story, could pick the answer to your question. You have seen Ents, O king, Ents out of Fangorn Forest, which in your tongue you call the Entwood. Did you think that the name was given only in idle fancy? Nay, Theoden, it is otherwise. To them you are but the passing tale. All the years from Eorl the Young to Theoden the Old are of little count to them, and all the deeds of your house but a small matter." The king was silent. "Ents," he said at length, "out of the shadows of legend I begin a little to understand the marvel of the trees, I think. I have lived to see strange days. Long we have tended our beasts in our field, built our houses, wrought our tools, or ridden away to help in the wars of Minas Tirith. And that we called the life of men, the way of the world. We cared little for what lay beyond the borders of our land. Songs we have that tell of these things, but we are forgetting them, teaching them only to children as a careless custom. And now the songs have come down among us out of strange places and walk visible under the sun." "You should be glad, Theoden King," said Gandalf.
For not only the little life of men is now endangered, but the life also of those which you have deemed the matter of legend. You are not without allies, even if you know them not. Yet also I should be sad, said Theoden, for however the fortune of war shall go, may it not so end that much was fair and wonderful should pass forever out of Middle-earth? It may, said Gandalf. The evil of Sauron cannot be wholly cured, nor made as if it had not been. But to such days we are doomed. Let us now go on with the journey we have begun. Is a really, really important lesson here. Tolkien rejected any sort of idea that his work was allegorical. And the reason that he said that, there's many reasons why he would reject that. Mostly because allegories they're on purpose. The author has to intend them. They're not allusions that we find in the text. That's what are called applications. And he did say that when most people say allegory, what they really mean is application. And he did refer in one of his letters to his work not as allegory and not as theology, but as literature, and specifically didactic literature. And didactic literature refers to something that tells us a lesson. Now, that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, because allegories are lessons. But allegories are specifically topical lessons that are written in the politics of their time, to make commentary on what is going on in the world. What we're seeing here is what his son, Christopher Tolkien, referred to as the thoughts of the author. And you'll find the thoughts of any author in their work. And here he says, and this is important, where he speaks through Gandalf. Gandalf is he is the voice of Gandalf in many ways, where he says, let's get this exactly right, the evil of Sauron cannot be wholly cured, nor made as if it had not been. This is really important. This is an important lesson. Sauron, he is saying, cannot be made good. And he knows this now, But beyond that, he's also saying that the things that Sauron did, we might be able to reverse some of them. But we can never reverse all of them. He has done damage that is permanent. There will be scars of what he has done that are everlasting. And we could never, never make the world like it was. Now, is he irredeemable? I would say not. I would say he's not irredeemable. He cannot be made to be good. But that doesn't mean that he can't choose to be good. Unfortunately, he will not choose to be good in any tale that we know of. Somebody asked me, and this was featured in a video not very long ago, why the Valar couldn't put their essence into the world to sort of cleanse what Morgoth had done to the world. It was Morgoth let so much of his power pass into the world that it's tainted. And I said, well, here's the thing. That power in the world, that's still Morgoth. It's still him. Even though he's gone from the world, that bit of him in the world is him. And you can't exorcise him from the world any more than you could exorcise Sauron from the One Ring. Because if that was a possibility, that would be a lot easier than Frodo walking to Mount Doom, and going through this horrific experience. Nor could you force redemption on somebody. You can't cleanse Morgoth of evil. He has to choose it. That's important. How did Myron get the name of the beloved? Was he always secretly evil, or was he with Morgoth? No, he wasn't with Morgoth from the beginning. The ones that were nobody was really with him from the beginning, because even Melkor was not evil in the beginning. It's what Elrond said. Nothing is evil in the beginning. As a very important lesson that Elrond said.
Sauron was absolutely good at one point. It's not the beloved, by the way. It's the admirable or the precious, but not the beloved. There's a difference there. He was good until he started to see everything as being chaotic, and he aligned himself with Melkor. He wasn't one of them that turned during the creation of the universe, because that would be the Balrogs. He did spend some time with Aule as a perfectly ordinary sort of guy, you know, and he was called the Admirable because people admired him, you know, and he was called the Precious because he was unique, and then he was called the Cruel, and he was called the Hated, and he was called there was another one, Gorthar the Cruel, Sauron the Abhorred, you know. That came later. Those are names the elves came up with. I'll tell you, though, the lesson is that good and evil is a choice. And that when you do evil, you leave a mark. And you might be able to get some of the stain out, but not all of it. And when you do good, you leave a mark as well. And you could rub some of that out with evil, but not all of it. Everything that we do, whether for good or for ill, has left its mark on the world. Is the Precious that Gollum calls him related to that? 100%. 100%. Absolutely. I mean, here, let's go to Tom Bombadil, Tommy. He called the ring the Precious Ring. He didn't know about Gollum. He didn't know about any of that. Tolkien didn't put things that were similarly in a linguistic fashion unless he was doing it on purpose. You know? And if you note that he didn't really start calling the ring the Precious until the Lord of the Rings, because when it was the Hobbit and it was kind of disconnected from, Sauron and everything, and it was just like a magic ring. You note that it was when Gollum said Precious, he was referring to himself in that story, and the ring he kept calling it the birthday present, right? But in the Lord of the Rings, when he's sort of correcting some of the mistakes here, the ring is the Precious, and the ring is Sauron, and Sauron is the ring, So like I said, the lesson here is that every action leaves a mark on the world, and sometimes it seems like some of our actions may get undone, but when you do something really big, whether it's something really big that's good or really something really big that's not so good, you're leaving a mark on the world that cannot be made as if you never existed. So basically, he's saying that what these powerful beings do is permanent. And he knows this because he saw it happen the first time when he was protecting the elves while the Valar were all fighting Melkor. The world was so messed up, and the scars of it are still around. Even Beleriand, that's gone. And Beleriand is gone because of actions both good and bad, because of a war that was fought between good and evil. And you can't restore that unless, of course, the world itself is restored to its factory settings, which Galadriel seems to think may happen at some point. But we'll talk about that more in the Return of the King. Let's return here. The company turned then away from the coombe and from the wood, and took the road towards the fords. Legolas followed reluctantly. The sun had set. Already it had sunk behind the rim of the world. But as they rode out from the shadow of the hills that looked west to the Gap of Rohan, the sky was still red, and a burning light was under the floating clouds. Dark against it there wheeled and flew many black-winged birds. Some passed overhead with mournful cries, returning to their homes among the rocks. The carrion fowl
have ever been busy on the battlefield, said Eomer. They rode now at an easy pace, and dark came down from the plains about them. The slow moon mounted, now waxing towards the full, and in its cold silver light the swelling grasslands rose and fell like a wide grey sea. They had ridden for some 4 hours from the branching of the roads when they drew near the fords. Long slopes ran swiftly down to where the river spread in stony shoals between high grassy terraces. Borne upon the wind they heard the howling of wolves. Their hearts were heavy, remembering the many men that had fallen in battle in this place. The road dipped between rising turf banks, carving its way through the terraces to the river's edge, and up again upon the further side. There were 3 lines of flat stepping stones across the stream, and between them fords for horses that went from either brink to a bare eyot in the mist. The riders looked down upon the crossings, and it seemed strange to them, for the fords had never been a place full of the rush and clatter of water upon stones, but now they were silent. The beds of the stream were almost dry, a bare waste of shingles and grey sand. This has become a dreary place, said Eomer. What sickness has befallen the river? Many fair things Saruman has destroyed. Has he devoured the springs of Isen too? So it would seem, said Gandalf. Alas, said Theoden, must we pass this way where the carrion beasts devour so many good riders of the mark? This is our way, said Gandalf. Grievous is the fall of your men, but you shall see that at least the wolves of the mountains do not devour them. It is with their friends the orcs that they hold their feast. Such indeed is the friendship of their kind. Come. All right. We have to pause again because another big lesson was just in there. And this is one when I sometimes I have to tap the sign here. Evil is never cooperative. Whenever there are 2 beings or 2 factions that are evil and they work together, they're not working for each other. They're not really working with each other. They're working for themselves. Saruman is not working for Sauron, and Sauron is not working for Saruman. Sauron was not working for Morgoth. The orcs don't like their masters. The evil creatures and the evil beings all hate each other. They hate everything. That's what makes them evil. So they don't get along. The relationship between them is always master and slave. It's never comrades. They don't have friends. And here he's saying that the wolves are eating the orcs, and that's their friendship. It's worth nothing. It's sort of like some people have this thought, as soon as if I was to die alone in my apartment, my cat is going to eat me after a few days. That sort of thing, Although, that might be more of a starvation thing. But here we're seeing Gandalf basically saying that just because they were allies doesn't mean that the wolves won't devour you, There's a Slayer song, "Evil Has No Boundaries." That's a good comparison to make there, Wayne. Evil is non-cooperative. The evil creatures do not love each other. They do not love their masters. They don't have boundaries. They would cross that line and eat their friends, so to speak, their comrades, their allies, and they would almost revel in it, really. That's what it comes down to. They rode on down the river, and as they came, the wolves ceased their howling and slunk away. Fear fell on them, seeing Gandalf and the moon, and Shadowfax's horse shining like silver. The riders passed over to the islet, and glittering eyes watched them wanly from the shadows of the banks. "Look," said Gandalf, "friends have laboured here." And they saw that in the midst of the eyot a mound was piled, ringed with stones, and set about it were many spears. "Here lies all the men of the mark that fell near this place," said Gandalf. "Here let them rest," said Eomer. And boy, it just started raining really hard. I could hear it even with my headphones on. "Here let them rest," said Eomer, "and when their spears have rotted and rusted, still may their mounds stand and guard the fords of the Isen." "Is this your work also, Gandalf, my friend?" said Theoden. "You accomplished much in the evening and a night." "With the help of Shadowfax and others," said Gandalf. "I rode fast and far, but here beside the mound I will say this for your comfort. Many fell in the battle of the fords, but fewer than rumour made them. More were scattered than were slain. I gathered together all that I could find. Some of them I sent to join Erkenbrand. Some I sent to this labour that you see, and they by now have gone back to Edoras. Many others I sent thither before to guard your house. Saruman, I knew, had dispatched his full strength against you, and his servants had turned aside from all other errands and gone to Helm's Deep. The land seemed empty of enemies, yet I feared that wolf riders and plunderers might ride none the less to Meduseld while it was undefended. But now I think you fear not. You will find your house to welcome your return. Let me answer this question here that Walter has. So was Sauron planning on Morgoth's downfall so he could leave him, I imagine? He was more happy outside of Morgoth's service, but was he hoping Morgoth would fail so that he could finally be rid of him? Good question. Obviously, I can't be in the mind of Sauron, but I've always said that the reason that Sauron took up with Morgoth was because he believed that doing that was going to fulfill his goals of making everything orderly. I don't think that he liked that Morgoth lost. And the reason is because he was high in his councils and he was basically put in charge of everything. He was the lieutenant of Morgoth, basically his second in command. So Morgoth was very hands-off. He pretty much let Sauron run everything, and I think Sauron liked it that way. So, yeah, every once in a while, he would have to put up with Morgoth, but usually it wasn't really so bad for him. He was pretty much left to his own devices. So while he had no love of Morgoth, he certainly thought of him as very, very useful, we'll say. Let's continue. Yep, he was left in charge of the war. He commanded Morgoth's armies. That's exactly right. All right, let's see. And glad shall I be to see it again, said Theoden, though brief now I doubt not shall my abiding there. With that the company said farewell to the island and the mound, and passed over the river, and climbed the further bank. Then they rode on, glad to have left the mournful fords. As they went, the howling of the wolves broke out anew. There was an ancient highway that ran down from Isengard to the crossings. For some way it took its course beside the river, bending with it east and then north, but at the last it turned away and went straight toward the gates of Isengard. And these were under the mountain side in the west of the valley, 16 miles or more from its mouth. This road they followed, but they did not ride upon it, for the ground beside it was firm and level, covered for many miles about with short springing turf. They rode now more swiftly, and by midnight the fords were nearly 5 leagues behind. Then they halted, ending their night's journey, for the king was weary. They then come to the feet of the misty mountains, and the long arms of Nan Curanir stretched down to meet them. Dark lay the vale before them, for the moon had passed into the west, and its light was hidden by the hills. But out of the deep shadow of the dale rose a vast spire of smoke and vapour. As it mounted, it caught the rays of the sinking moon, and spread in shimmering billows, black and silver, over the starry sky. "What do you think of that, Gandalf?" asked Aragorn. "One would say that all the Wizard's Vale was burning." "There is ever a fume above that valley in these days," said Éomer, "but I have never seen aught like this before. These are steams rather than smoke. Saruman is brewing some devilry to greet us. Maybe he is boiling all the waters in Isen, and that is why the river runs dry." "Maybe it is," said Gandalf. "Tomorrow we shall learn what he is doing. Now let us rest for a while, if we can." They camped beside the bed of the Isen River. It was still silent and empty. Some of them slept a little, but late in the night the watchmen cried out, and all awoke. The moon was gone. Stars were shining above, but over the ground there crept a darkness blacker than night. On both sides of the river it rolled towards them, going northward. "Stay where you are," said Gandalf. "Draw no weapons. Wait, and it will pass you by." A mist gathered about them. Above them a few stars still glimmered faintly, but on either side there arose walls of impenetrable gloom. Where a narrow lane between moving towers of shadow. Voices they heard, whisperings and groanings, and an endless rustling sigh. The earth shook under them. Long it seemed to them that they sat and were afraid, but at last the darkness and the rumour passed and vanished between the mountain's arms. Away south, upon the Hornburg in the middle night, Men heard a great noise, as a wind in the valley, and the ground trembled, and all were afraid, and no one ventured to go forth. But in the morning they went out and were amazed, for the slain orcs were gone, and the trees also. Far down in the valley of the deep the grass was crushed and trampled brown, as if giant herdsmen had pastured great droves of cattle there. But a mile below the dike a huge pit had been delved in the earth, and over it stones were piled into a hill. Men believed that the orcs whom they had slain were buried there, but whether those who had fled into the wood were with them none could say, for no men ever set foot upon that hill. The Death Down it was afterwards called, and no grass would grow there. But the strange trees were never seen in Deepingcombe again. They had returned at night, and had gone far away to the dark dales of Fangorn. Thus they were revenged upon the orcs. The king and his company slept no more that night, but they saw and heard no other strange thing save one. The voice of the river beside them was suddenly awoke. There was a rush of water hurrying down among the stones, and when it had passed, the ice flowed and bubbled in its bed again, as it had ever done. At dawn they made ready to go. The light came grey and pale, and they did not see the rising of the sun. Their air above was heavy with fog, and a reek lay on the land about them. They went slowly, riding now upon the highway. It was broad and hard and well tended. Dimly through the mists they could descry the long arm of the mountains rising on their left. They had passed into Nan Kiranir, the Wizard's Vale. That was a sheltered valley, open only to the south. Once it had been fair and green, and through it the ice flowed, already deep and strong before it found its plains, for it was fed by many springs and lesser streams among the rain-washed hills, and all about it there had lain a pleasant fertile land. Dale, yes, there is a town called Dale, but they're also referring to a dale like a valley. Okay. So a dale is sort of like a valley, although not necessarily with hills around it, just sort of a depression in the earth. I wanted to talk here about the Wizard's Vale. They call it Nan Kiranir, which is interesting because Kiranir is one of the translations of Saruman's real name, or he had a few names. In the very early days of Middle-earth, he was called Tarandor, but Kuramo is the name that he was mostly known as in the West, in the Undying Lands. Kuramo, which is Quenya Elvish. Kiranir is the same word. It's in Sindarin Elvish rather than that. So what does it mean? It means man of skill, or wizard, essentially. Because you remember, wizard it means a lot of different things. And I talked about this in episode 125 of my question answering series about the different meanings of wizards, and they all had so many names and everything. But what's interesting here is that he basically was named wizard. One of the oldest, I think the oldest definition of what a wizard is somebody with great skill in a particular area. Like if you're just, like, say, really good at carpentry, you could be considered a wizard of carpentry, a man of skill. So it's interesting that Saruman, and Saruman is even a translation into Westron, Saru, man. Saru meaning skill, skilled man. So basically, all of his names essentially just mean wizard, in that sense, that not the magical sense, which is also used by Tolkien. He sort of combined the two definitions and did not use it as a pejorative, because it used to be if you called somebody a wizard in the sense that they were a practitioner of magic, you were insulting them. Sort of like calling somebody a sorcerer or a pagan or something like that, or a witch, And Tolkien was saying, well, let's take the meaning of wizard as being an honorific and the meaning of wizard as being a user of magic, and sort of combine it into one thing. Somebody who's a sage who is also magical in nature. But it's interesting, that Kiranir is just the Sindarin name for Saruman.
So he has a valley named after himself, which seems like something that he would do, doesn't it? He probably, I mean, you know, he put the S rune on everything. He put the white hand on everything. He was all about branding. He put his name on everything, you know? The names of the blue wizards consist of Alatar, Marenitar, Hymenar, Palanda, Ramastano, and Palasendo. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, Alatar and Palando are the names that they had in the West. And then we got two different sets of names that they had in Middle-earth. And unfortunately, it's not like one is Quenya and one is Sindarin. They're both Quenya. It's just Tolkien gave them at different points in time, just like Kurumo and Tarandor were different points in time. So one of them is Marenitar and Ramastano, and the other is Hymenar and Palasendo. Now, Hymenar and Palasendo might just be much, much older names because they appear in the book The Nature of Middle-earth, along with Tarandor being a name for Saruman, and Hravendil being a name for Radagast, where we would normally know him as Iwendil. So I think that either these are alternate names that were used in the deeps of time, referring to Tarandor, Hravendil, Hymenar, and Palasendo, or they were Tolkien tweaking the linguistics and changing their names. We really don't know. It was some of his very, very last writings. You know, each wizard has a ton of different names. You know, Radagast we only know of 3 names, but that's because we only really know a little bit about him. The blue wizards, we know 3 names apiece. But Saruman and Gandalf have a lot of names. But interestingly, he was consistent with Gandalf. Like, Gandalf has a lot of names. There's Incarnus and Mithrandir and all the Greyheim and Stormpro and Lothspel and all this other stuff, right? And, of course, Gandalf and Aloran. And when he wrote that passage about the 5 Guardians in The Nature of Middle-earth, and he named them Hravendil, Tarandor, Palasendo, Hymenar, and Aloran. So that one wasn't changed. He didn't try to change that one. So because he kept Gandalf's name the same, that's what leads me to believe that he wasn't changing the names so much as he was saying that these are older, more archaic forms of them. Moogle's asking me if hobbits had a lot of names. Not so much that, like, sometimes they had first names and last names, which is somewhat unusual in Middle-earth. You know, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Aragorn has a ton of names. But usually people had a name, and sometimes that name was translated into a few different languages. And sometimes they had an epithet, which is like a nickname, basically a title given to them by people. Galadriel, for example, is an epithet. All the elves had 2 names. She was called Nerwin, and she was called, I can't think of the other one, but Galadriel was what her husband called her. So that's where that came from. But the hobbits, they would have a first name and a last name, and then sometimes they would have nicknames, like Bandabras Took being called the Old Took. Bandabras was not called the Old. Gerontius Took was called the Old. Bandabras was called Bull Roarer, you know. Bilbo was Mad Baggins, you know. But you know, sometimes they would have a whole bunch of different nicknames. But yeah. Now, what form would the 5 Guardians take? Would it be like elves, or was it more like shapes of power? I think in that instance they were more like shapes of power because they were unseen protecting the elves. I think the only one that had form was probably, I don't know why they were called the 5 Guardians when there were 6 of them. We'd have to make a call to the afterlife and ask Tolkien that. Melian probably had form because she stayed behind and fell in love with Thingol. And maybe that could indicate that the others had form, but I tend to think that in that he miscounted. Yeah. Oh, I mean, you know what it could be, Alice? I think actually I'm gonna make a Hail Mary here. I think that it was sort of a 3 Musketeers type situation. That, you know, people will say, well, why is it called the 3 Musketeers? when there's 4 of them? And the answer is that there are 3 guys in this story that are, just fully trained, licensed and bonded musketeers. And then there's D'Artagnan, who is like, he comes along when the musketeers are being disbanded. You ended up going to a Mexican place? Nice. What did you have? So anyway, I love Mexican food. But since Melian stayed in Middle-earth, she was removed from the 5 Guardians. I don't think it's that, because they were called the 5 Guardians when they were protecting the elves. I think it's that because she was in charge of them, she was over them, not of them. So it's sort of like, how your manager at work is not exactly part of the team. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm Melian, and these are my 5 Guardians. It's like a band name, Melian and the Wizards. All right, let's continue, because we still have a few pages left here in this chapter. I want to know what Alice, what you had for dinner at the Mexican place. It was not so now. Beneath the walls of Isengard there were still acres tilled by the slaves of Saruman, but most of the valley had become a wilderness of weeds and thorns. Brambles trailed upon the ground, or clambering over bush and bank made shaggy caves where small beasts housed. No trees grew there, but among the rank grasses could still be seen the burned and axe-hewn stumps of ancient groves. It was a sad country, silent now but for the stony noise of quick waters. Smokes and steams drifted in sullen clouds and lurked in the hollows. The riders did not speak. Many doubted in their hearts, wondering to what dismal end their journey led. After they had ridden for some miles, the highway became a wide street, paved with great flat stones, squared and laid with skill. No blade of grass was seen in any joint. Deep gutters filled with trickling water ran down on either side. Suddenly a tall pillar loomed up before them. It was black, and set upon it was a great stone, carved and painted in the likeness of a long white hand. Its finger pointed north. Not far now they knew that the gates of Isengard must stand, and their hearts were heavy, but their eyes could not pierce the mists ahead. Chicken mole and some chili, rellenos, and a margarita. That sounds like a great time. That sounds amazing. Delicious. I am a little jealous. All I had for dinner was chicken salad sandwich. I had tacos yesterday, but that was like from Taco Bell. That wasn't, like really good Mexican food. And I'm not saying that Taco Bell's bad. I'm just saying it's not Mexican food. Let's see. All right, let's continue here. Beneath the mountain's arm, within the wizard's vale, through years uncounted had stood that ancient place that men called Isengard. Partly it was shaped in the making of the mountains, but mighty works the men of Westerness had wrought there of old, and Saruman had dwelt there long, and had not been idle. This was its fashion, while Saruman was at its height, accounted by many the chief of wizards. A great ring wall of stone, like towering cliffs, stood out from the shelter of the mountainside, from which it ran and then returned again. One entrance only was there made in it, a great arch delved in the southern wall. Here, through the black rock, a long tunnel had been hewn, closed at either end with mighty doors of iron. They were so wrought and poised upon their huge hinges, points of steel driven into the living stone, that when unbarred they could be moved with a light thrust of the arms noiselessly. One who passed in and came at length out of the echoing tunnel beheld a plain, a great circle, somewhat hollowed like a vast shallow bowl. A mile it measured from rim to rim. Once it had been green and filled with avenues and groves of fruitful trees, watered by streams that flowed from the mountains to a lake, but no green thing grew there in the latter days of Saruman. The roads were paved with stone flags, dark and hard, and beside their borders instead of trees there marched long lines of pillars, some of marble, some of copper and of iron, joined by heavy chains. So, not to get too deep into myself using an allegory, but I just want to say Saruman paved the rose garden. That's what Tolkien is getting at, basically, here. He turned something beautiful into something utilitarian and mechanic. And this is seen as a great evil because, what we have to understand about Tolkien is that he was a great environmentalist. He really believed in the beauty of nature, and he felt that we were really doing a lot to wreck it. And that's what we're seeing here. Strawberry. Well, I think you were right to go with what you ate. I think if you added strawberry, that'd be a little too much sweetness, with the mole sauce and everything. I think you chose correctly there. All right, let's continue here. Many houses there were, chambers, halls, and passages, cut and tunneled back into the walls upon their inner sides, so that all the open circle was overlooked by countless windows and dark doors. Thousands could dwell there, workers, servants, slaves, and warriors, with great store of arms. Wolves were fed and stabled in deep dens beneath. The plain, too, was bored and delved. Shafts were driven deep into the ground. Their upper ends were covered by low mounds and domes of stone, so that in the moonlight the ring of Isengard looked like a graveyard of unquiet dead. For the ground trembled. The shafts ran down by many slopes and spiral stairs to caverns far under. There Saruman had treasuries, storehouses, armories, smithies, and great furnaces. Iron wheels revolved there endlessly, and hammers thudded. At night plumes of vapor steamed from the vents, lit from beneath with red light or blue or venomous green. To the center all roads ran between their chains. There stood a tower of marvelous shape. It was fashioned by the builders of old, who smoothed the ring of Isengard, and yet it seemed a thing not made by the craft of men, but riven from the bones of the earth in the ancient torment of the hills. A peak and an isle of rock it was, black and gleaming hard. 4 mighty piers of many-sided stone were welded into one. But near the summit they opened into gaping horns, their pinnacles sharp as the points of spears, keen-edged as knives. Between them was a narrow space, and there upon a floor of polished stone, written with strange signs, a man might stand 500 feet above the plain. This was Orthanc, the citadel of Saruman, the name of which had, by design or chance, a twofold meaning, for in the elvish speech Orthanc signifies Mount Fang, but in the language of the Mark of old, the cunning mind. And once again, just to say, Old English, which represents the Rohan language, which is not called Rohirric, despite what people on Quora might tell you. It's called Rohanese. Orthanc, cunning mind. It just means wizard again. So Saruman has all this stuff named after him. Now, I mean, as pointed out here, by design or chance. In this case, it's by chance, because the name Orthanc is before he came there, But it's just really interesting to see, how he's just got everything branded, White Hand, Non-Curanir, Orthanc, everything paved, all the beauty gone, Like I said, it's not an allegory, but it sometimes feels like one. A strong place and wonderful was Isengard, and long had it been beautiful. And there great lords had dwelt, and wardens of Gondor upon the west, and wise men that watched the stars. But Saruman had slowly shaped it into its shifting purposes, and made it better, as he thought, being deceived, for all those arts and subtle devices for which he forsook his former wisdom, and which fondly he imagined were his own, came but from Mordor. So that what he made was naught, only a little copy, a child's model, or a slave's flattery, of that vast fortress, armory, prison, furnace of great power, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, which suffered no rival, and laughed at flattery, biding its time, secure in its pride and its immeasurable strength. This was the stronghold of Saruman, as fame reported it, for within living memory the men of Rohan had not passed its gates, save perhaps a few such as Wormtongue, who came in secret and told no man what they saw. Saruman seems very full of himself. He's incredibly full of himself, and he's always sort of been that way. Even when he was good, he was full of himself, And I think this passage that I just read is where Tolkien's publisher got the idea to call the book The Two Towers, because he's saying that this tower Even though it was, built by the men of Numenor and everything, but the way that Saruman has it set up, he's thinking he's making it better, he's improving it, and he's even convinced himself that it was all his idea and that it's all original, but in really he's just copying Sauron, just sort of like subconsciously doing a poor imitation of what Sauron had done. And that's really interesting. I think that's where the publisher came up with the idea of calling the book The Two Towers, which Tolkien did not like. He didn't want to call it that. He wanted to call it, he had several names. The Treason of Isengard was one of them. But he was confused about, there's so many different towers, and even in his own explanation, he said that the two towers were Minas Tirith and Minas Morgul, but then, he changed his mind about Minas Morgul, and it was more like Cirithungul, so it's a whole thing, the whole two towers thing, which we talked about already. But I'm just bringing it back here that I think this passage is what gave them the idea to call the book The Two Towers. All right, let's finish this. We only have a bit left here. Now Gandalf rode to the great pillar of the hand, and passed it, and as he did so the riders saw to their wonder that the hand appeared no longer white. It was stained as with dried blood, and looking closer they perceived that its nails were red. Unheeding, Gandalf rode into the mist, and reluctantly they followed him. All about them now, as if there had been a sudden flood, wide pools of water lay beside the road, filling the hollows, and rills went trickling down among the stones. At last Gandalf halted and beckoned to them, and they came, and saw that beyond him the mists had cleared, and a pale sunlight shone. The hour of noon has passed. They were come to the doors of Isengard. But the doors lay hurled and twisted on the ground, and all about stone cracked and splintered into countless jagged shards, were scattered far and wide, or piled in ruinous heaps. The great arch still stood, but it opened now upon a roofless chasm. The tunnel was laid bare, and through the cliff-like walls on either side great rents and breaches had been torn. Their towers were beaten into dust. If the great sea had risen in wrath and fallen on the hills with storm, it could have worked no greater ruin. The ring beyond was filled with steaming water, a bubbling cauldron, in which there heaved and floated a wreckage of beams and spars, chests and casks, and broken gear. Twisted and leaning pillars reared their splintered stems above the flood, but all the roads were drowned. Far off it seemed, half veiled in the winding cloud, there loomed the island rock. Still, dark and tall, unbroken by the storm, the tower of Orthanc stood. Pale waters lapped about its feet. The king and all his company sat silent on their horses, marvelling, perceiving that the power of Saruman was overthrown. But how they could not guess. And now they turned their eye towards the archway and the ruined gates. There they saw close beside them a great rubble heap, and suddenly they were aware of two small figures lying on it at their ease, grey-clad, hardly to be seen among the stones. There were bottles and bowls and platters laid beside them, as if they had just eaten well, and now rested from their labour. One seemed asleep, the other, with crossed legs and arms behind his head, leaned back against a broken rock, and sent from his mouth long wisps and little rings of thin blue smoke. For a moment Theoden and Éomer and all his men stared at them in wonder. Amid all the wreck of Isengard, this seemed to them the strangest sight. But before the king could speak, the small, smoke-breathing figure became suddenly aware of them, as they sat there silent on the edge of the mist. He sprang to his feet. A young man he looked, or like one, though not much more than half a man in height. His head of brown curling hair was uncovered, but he was clad in travel-stained cloak of the same hue and shape as the companions of Gandalf had worn when they rode to Edoras. He bowed very low, putting his hand upon his breast. Then, seeming not to observe the wizard and his friends, he turned to Éomer and the king. "Welcome, my lords, to Isengard," he said. "We are the door-wardens. Meriadoc, son of Saradoc, is my name, and my companion, who, alas, is overcome with weariness," here he gave the other a dig with his foot, "is Peregrine, son of Paladin, the house of Took. Far in the north is our home. The Lord Saruman is within, but at the moment he is closeted with one Worm-tongue, or doubtless he would be down here to welcome such honourable guests." "Doubtless he would," laughed Gandalf. "And was it Saruman that ordered you to guard his damaged doors, and watch for the arrival of guests when your attention could be spared from plate and bottle?"
No, good sir, the matter escaped him, answered Merry gravely. He has been much occupied. Our orders came from Treebeard, who has taken over management of Isengard. He commanded me to welcome the Lord of Rohan with fitting words. Have I done my best? I have done my best.
And what of your companions? What about Legolas and me? Cried Gimli, unable to contain himself longer. You rascals! You woolly-footed and wool-pated trunts! A fine hunt you have led us! 200 leagues through fen and forest, battle and death to rescue you, and here we find you feasting and idling and smoking! Smoking! Where did you come by the weed, you villains? Hammer and tongs! I am so torn between rage and joy. If I do not burst, it will be a marvel.
You speak for me, Gimli, laughed Legolas. Though I would sooner learn how they came by the wine. One thing you have not found in your hunting, and that's brighter wits, said Pippin, opening an eye. Here you find us sitting on a field of victory amid the plunder of armies, and you wonder how we came by a few well-earned comforts.
Well-earned, said Gimli. I cannot believe that.
The riders laughed. It cannot be doubted that we witnessed the meeting of dear friends, said Theoden. So these are the lost ones of your company, Gandalf. The days are fated to be filled with marvels. Already I have seen many since I have left my house, and now here before my eyes stand yet another of the folk of legend. Are you not these halflings that some among us call the Holbitlan? Hobbits, if you please, lord, said Pippin. Hobbits, said Theoden. Your tongue is strangely changed, but the name sounds not unfitting so. Hobbits! No report have I heard that does justice to the truth. Merry bowed, and Pippin got up and bowed low. You are gracious, lord, or I hope that I may take you so at your words, he said. And here is another marvel. I have wandered in many lands since I left my home, and never till now have I found people that I knew any story concerning hobbits. My people came out of the north long ago, said Theoden. But I will not deceive you, we know no tales about hobbits. All that is said among us is that far away over many hills and rivers live the halfling folk that dwell in holes and sand dunes. But there are no legends of their deeds, for it is said that they do little and avoid the sight of men, being able to vanish in a twinkling, and they can change their voices to resemble the piping of birds. But it seems more could be said. It could indeed, lord, said Merry. For one thing, said Theoden, I have not heard that they spouted smoke from their mouths. That is not surprising, answered Merry, for it is an art which we have not practised for more than a few generations. It was Tobold Hornblower Longbottom in the South Farthing who first grew the true pipeweed in his gardens about the year 1070 according to our reckoning. How old Toby came by the plant.
You do not know your danger, Theoden, interrupted Gandalf. These hobbits will sit on the edge of ruin, and discuss the pleasures of the table or the small doings of their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers, and remoter cousins to the 9th degree, if you encourage them with undue patience. Some other time would be more fitting for the history of smoking. Where is Treebeard, Merry?
Away on the north side, I believe. He went off to get a drink of clean water. Most of the other Ents are with him, still busy at their work over there. Merry waved his hand toward the steaming lake, and as they looked they heard a distinct rumbling and rattling as if an avalanche was falling from the mountainside. Far away came a whoom, as of horns blowing triumphantly.
And is Orthanc then left unguarded? Asked Gandalf.
There is the water, said Merry, but Quickbeam and some of the others are watching it. Not all those posts and pillars in the plain are of Saruman's planting. Quickbeam, I think, is by the rock near the foot of the stair. Yes, a tall grey Ent is there, said Legolas, but his arms are at his side, and he stands still as a door-tree.
It is past noon, said Gandalf, and we, at any rate, have not eaten since early morning. Yet I wish to see Treebeard as soon as possible. Did he leave me no message, or has plate and bottle driven it from your mind?
He left a message, said Merry, and I was coming to it, but I have been hindered by many other questions. I was to say that if the Lord of the Mark and Gandalf will ride to the northern wall, they will find Treebeard there, and he will welcome them. I may add that they will also find food of the best there. It was discovered and selected by your humble servants. He bowed.
Gandalf laughed. That is better, he said. Well, Theoden, will you ride with me to find Treebeard? We must go round about, but it is not far. When you see Treebeard, you will learn much, for Treebeard is Fangorn, and the eldest and chief of the Ents. and when you speak with him you will hear the speech of the oldest of all living things."
"I will come with you," said Theoden. "Farewell, my hobbits. May we meet again in my house. There you shall sit beside me and tell me of all your heart's desire, the deeds of your grandsires, as far as you can reckon them. And we will speak of old Tobold the Old and his herb lore. Farewell." The hobbits bowed low. "So that is the King of Rohan," said Pippin in an undertone. "A fine old fellow. Very polite."
And that's where we stop. That's the end of that chapter. We got through quite a bit today. We got through 2 chapters here. The thing I want to mention here is, well, there's a few things. Mary says that smoking is sort of a new thing, only a few generations old. But we know what's interesting is that the pipe weed, he says that Tobold, old Toby, called it the first true pipe weed. But in many parts of the world, it's known as Westman's weed because it was brought from Numenor. And you would think, well, why were the men of the West bringing the weed to Middle-earth if they weren't smoking it? And actually, they just liked the way it smelled. They were using it as sort of a potpourri sort of thing. So it was the hobbits who figured out smoking. And what's interesting here is that Gandalf says one of the very few things that he ever says that is just absolutely incorrect. And I think he knows that it's not exactly right, but he also doesn't want to get into a big discussion about it here. Is he calls Treebeard the oldest living thing in Middle-earth, and we know that's not true because we know about Tom Bombadil. But I think that's like a whole other discussion if he was to say, oh, well, there's this other guy that lives in a forest near the Shire, and he's even older, and then Theoden would want to hear about that, and it would become a really long sort of thing. Let me just catch up on chat here. Not to be confused with Scottie Pippen. Yeah, Scott. What's funny is being a fan of the Lord of the Rings growing up, and then in the '90s, basketball was huge. When I had the NBA Jam video game, and there's a guy named Scottie Pippen, and of course I thought of Pippen. Of course I thought of that. Let's see. Wonder if this wine is from Dorwinion or if it's some cheaply made wine or of Tima, like Sauron's weapons. I would believe that. So here's the thing. I think you'll like this, Walter, actually, because it is mentioned that there were a lot of storerooms in Isengard. And the ones that Merry and Pippin specifically broke into were Saruman's personal stores. And that's why they found pipeweed there, because he had a secret pipeweed habit. He had started a pipeweed trade from the Shire to Isengard. So there's a lot going on there. And I believe that because it was his personal stores, that was his wine, and therefore it was probably something really great. It probably wasn't some cheap plonk that he found or that the orcs made, for him. Do I think that Gandalf would have learned how old Tom was during his talks with him? Yes, absolutely. Because Tom's favorite discussion, his favorite topic of discussion, is Tom. He as soon as you meet him, he's going to sing you a song that's going to tell you who he is, what color his boots and jacket's in, the fact that he's a merry old fellow. And the big question that everybody has is, well, who are you, Tom? And Goldberry's answer was, very laconic. She just said he is. But when Tom was asked, he went into this whole thing. I saw the first raindrop. I saw the first acorn. I saw the darkness before it was made fearful. I was here before Morgoth was. He's very eager to tell you how old he is. And considering that Gandalf really wanted to talk to Tom before he left for the West, I think one of the major things that Gandalf was going to ask was, really, who are you? And he would probably get the same exact thing that Frodo got. the same exact speech, except that Gandalf would understand it better, I think. So absolutely, he would discover all about that. It's very possible at this point that he might not know all that much about Tom. Elrond knew about Tom. Elrond called him the eldest and fatherless. But also, it was interesting because he was like, is it the same guy? Because if it's the same guy, yeah, he's really old, you know. He wasn't sure if it was the same Bombadil, you know. Of course, I think it was told that it was. Bombadil's like one of the most interesting figures because we really don't know much about him. He appears in 2 chapters in book 1. He's mentioned in book 6. He's mentioned in book 3 as well, but that's about it, you know. Maybe he just is a merry fella after all. He's more than that. He absolutely is. He's the master of wind and water and wood in his realm. I've always thought that Bombadil is a manifestation of Middle-earth itself. Was he there before Eru? No, because Eru created the world. What he's saying is that he was there before the Ainur, before the angels entered into the world. He was already there. He was old when the world was young. And if we go to, I'm going to bring out the Silmarillion. I'm going to read you just a tiny bit here. That the name of Tom Bombadil does not come up in the Silmarillion. But there is an allusion, I believe, in the first chapter, which is called the Ainu Lindala. Of course, I got to get to it. Here we are. Oh, wow, I opened it to the exact right page. Then Iluvatar spoke and said, Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know. And all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Then the Ainur were afraid, and they did not yet comprehend the words that were said to them. And Melkor was filled with shame, of which came secret anger. But Iluvatar arose in splendor, and he went forth from the far regions that he had made for the Ainur, and the Ainur followed him. But when they came into the void, Iluvatar said to them, Behold your music. And he showed to them a vision, giving them sight, where once was only hearing. And they saw a new world made visible before them, and it was globed amid the void, and it was suspended therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew. And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, Iluvatar said again, Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you, all those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole, and tributary to its glory. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, because he's only showing them a vision of the world. Now I'm going to skip ahead just 2 pages to the part where he actually creates the world. Then there was unrest among the Ainur, but Iluvatar called to them and said, I know the desire of your minds, that ye have seen should verily be, not only in your thought, but even as ye yourselves are, and yet other. Therefore I say, Ea, let these things be, and I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. And those of you that will may go down into it. And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as if it were a cloud with a living heart of flame. And they knew that this was no vision only, but that Iluvatar had made a new thing, Ea, the world that is. So, The flame imperishable, which is also referred to as the secret fire, he puts it into the heart of creation, and everything comes forth out of it. So basically, in the center of the world is a little piece of God's soul. So I have always believed that Bombadil, being the first living and breathing and speaking being to bloom out of the world before the elves, before the men, before the dwarves, before even the Ainur had entered into the world, was basically a spirit of the world itself. And just quick story. So, and I talked about this actually a lot in episode 125, but, I got into this stuff because of my mom. When I was really young, I was about 7 years old, and I had this teacher who believed that it was really important for kids to read, but also really important for kids to learn, to choose what they read, and not to just be assigned books. So we had this whole project. It was called the Independent Reading Folder. I remember this. And you would choose a book, and you would read a half hour a day on your own time. And all you would do, you wouldn't have to write a book report or anything. You didn't have to answer any questions or do any tests or anything like this, right? All you had to do was put the name of the book, the name of the author, the page that you started on, the page that you ended on, and then you had your parents sign it. And I was reading a lot of like science fiction type stuff, but then my mother gave me a copy of The Hobbit, and then that's where I first, experienced Tolkien. And so my mother was my introduction into fantasy and into Tolkien specifically. And she gave me, a few years later, The Lord of the Rings, and I devoured that, and then I moved on to Unfinished Tales, and from there I started actually studying this stuff when I was a teenager. But here's the thing, though. Even though my mother got me into this, she introduced me to The Hobbit, she never read The Hobbit. She read The Lord of the Rings, and she was very familiar with The Lord of the Rings, but she never read The Hobbit. She never read The Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales. Even though we had a copy of Unfinished Tales, I think she bought it, and I still have the same copy. This is the same exact one, from my youth. I don't think she read it, or she did, she forgot about it. But anyway, she never read The Silmarillion, she never read The Hobbit. So what's interesting here is that even though she read The Lord of the Rings and was very familiar with it, that was a long time ago. That was in the 70s, right? So, she never got the chance to go back and read it again, like I would read it over and over again. And so, then the Peter Jackson films happened. And I swear to you, I'm not doing a hyperbole. This is a real estimate. I think my mother might have watched the Peter Jackson trilogy probably around 200 times. Like, it's just, she almost every day I could go over there and she's watching one of them. It's just, but that's usually just because it's on, and she'll put it on for a little while and then like switch it off to like baseball or whatever, right? But I'm talking about, she probably watched them like 200 times from beginning to end, probably more times than I've watched them. And she loves the movies. And so, because she read the book once a long time ago, but has seen the movie, hundreds of times, movies, I should say, she remembers the movies more than the book. So she forgot Tom Bombadil. She didn't remember anything about Tom Bombadil. Any of the characters that were not in the movie, she forgot. She's forgot Erkenbrand, Imrahil, Glorfindel, Bombadil, all these characters. She doesn't know about them, right? So we were watching the Amazon show, The Rings of Power, and in comes Tom Bombadil. And, she knows what I do. She knows what I'm all about. So at some point, she turns to me, because we're watching this together. This is a bonding experience, all the new movies, everything that comes out. She didn't want to watch The War of the Rohirrim because she doesn't cartoons, and I got to bleep myself now, so let me just... all right. 3:32? Okay. She doesn't mess with cartoons. So she never watched The War of the Rohirrim. She didn't want to watch that one. But anyway, we watched this stuff together as this kind of a bonding experience. And she says, so really, who is this guy? And I explained to her the same thing that I just explained to you guys, except without whipping out a copy of the Silmarillion. I would have done that had I had a copy of the Silmarillion right on hand. I guess I could have brought it up on my phone. But anyway, I explained all of that about the flame imperishable and Tom being a spirit of Middle-earth itself. And she says to me, so he's Father Earth. Instead of Mother Earth, he's Father Earth. And I said, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. So, we watched the episodes that he's in. At the end of it, I don't know if you guys have seen this show. Yeah, I know it's a controversial show and everything, but the last scene is in season 2 was Bombadil and Gandalf. And she says, yeah, I can see it. He's Father Earth. Okay, there you go. The depiction of Bombadil was really good. But it's a shame he didn't make it into the Peter Jackson films, If Tom is Middle-earth, did Morgoth taint him somehow? I would say no. Because it was mentioned in The Nature of Middle-earth that Morgoth is almost everywhere, but he's not literally everywhere. And, for example, his essence is found more in gold than any other metal, and almost not at all in water. And my friend Matt Richardson is very fond of saying that one of the major rivers of that region of Middle-earth actually flows right from under Bombadil's house. I think, and he has made a what do you call it? It's not doubtful that he was in the world before Morgoth. He said he was in the world before Morgoth. And there's no reason to doubt him. He said he knew the dark before it was fearless and before the Dark Lord came from the outside. And the word outside was capitalized. Now, some people will say, well, maybe he was talking about Sauron, which I don't think he was. But either way, Sauron and Morgoth came into the world at the same time. So he was there already. He was absolutely in the world. Or are you saying, I think you might, actually, you know what, Walter, I think you're not saying that. I think you needed an Oxford comma there. Yes, doubtful that he could be correct. So I would say that the boundaries that he has made for himself, because he's not stuck there. He's just decided to be there. I think he's cordoned off a section of Middle-earth that doesn't have Morgoth in it. Now, I'm not going to say that there's no evil there, because that's not true. We saw it with Old Man Willow. And this is important. Old Man Willow is important to talk about, that he's not an agent of Morgoth. He's not an agent of Sauron. Because in one of the treatments for a film that never got made in the 60s that Tolkien was looking at, he was very annoyed with the idea that they had alluded to the fact that Bombadil was an agent. That Old Man Willow was an agent of the Dark Lord. And he said, not everything that's evil is in league with the devil. So he hasn't created for himself a land without evil. That's what the Valar did. But what he did, I think, is that he created a land without great evil, capitalized. Not petty evil, So I think that, Bombadil is really just insanely, powerfully good in his nature. If you guys ever want to read a really amazing article about Bombadil and his nature that I did not write, although I did edit it, my friend Matt Richardson wrote, I think, what is the article about the nature of Bombadil, which you can find on Quora. If you go to Quora and you look up, there is a group on there called The Nine, and that's a group that I'm in along with Matt and Sid and Laurel and a bunch of others. You'll find a lot of our deeper articles that we wrote for each other's sort of peer review, and one of the first ones was Matt's article about the nature of Bombadil and Ungoliant and the sort of Zoroastrian themes within that I would highly recommend. Even Glaurung was uncooperative with Morgoth. How would somebody think that Old Man Willow was his age? You see, that's a good point. But of course, you have to remember that we're talking about the 60s. The Silmarillion wasn't published, you know. So, of course he feared. Well, of course he feared Morgoth. But what Praise the Sun is saying is very true. Not that he was going against Morgoth, but that he didn't. He had his own will, even though Morgoth spoke through the dragon, and that's important to remember. He did speak through the dragon. Glaurung gazed with Morgoth's gaze, and he spoke with Morgoth's voice. However, when he was young, he escaped and went on a rampage, and he got really, really wounded because his armor, his scales, was not fully formed, and he got hit by a bunch of arrows. And Morgoth wasn't happy about that because he had a big plan for this dragon. So he almost got killed. I wouldn't say that he defied him so much as if, think of Glaurung at that stage in his life as a teenager that snuck out and caused some mayhem, you know? And then the father is like, look, I raised you to create mayhem, but we're going to do it in a very specific way, and you almost got killed, you know? That's the way that I see it. But yeah, evil's not cooperative, obviously. But I believe that Morgoth probably let part of himself pass into the dragon, and that's why in the Children of Húrin, he speaks with Morgoth's voice and gazes with Morgoth's eyes, and he is the agent of the curse on the Children of Húrin. Anyway, guys, we've gone a little late. It's after 11, and I have to go and edit the live because I accidentally F-bombed, so I gotta go bleep myself before I re-upload it. But anyway, guys, we're gonna go over the schedule here. So this is what's going on now. If you're watching on Twitch, you guys know that I stream every day. And so the next couple of days, you guys basically know what's going on. Actually, let me go over to my, here we are, this screen here. You guys know what the deal is. You guys know that I stream every single day with gaming stuff. Tomorrow afternoon, I will be live playing Final Fantasy for the After Years. We might even finish it. Saturday night, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Sunday night, Mega Man X5. Monday afternoon, Street Fighter 5. I'm doing this from memory. Tuesday night, more of Ender Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist. Wednesday afternoon, more of I Am Setsuna. And then a week from today, and this is relevant if you're watching on YouTube, we'll have another YouTube stream, and it will be the Council of Tolkien with me and Matt and Sid. And this is very relevant, because it was supposed to be today, and we changed it around. By the way, if you're wondering what happened, it was nothing really major. I got a phone call from Matt a few days ago, and he said, I'm the bearer of bad news. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said there was no way that he could make it this Thursday. And I said, well, what's happening? And he explained that basically it's his parents' 60th wedding anniversary, and that he's got to go to a dinner, and that he was thinking that this dinner was at 8 p.m., which you guys know Matt is actually in the West Coast. So that's like 11 p.m. for us, so we would have been done by then, and it wouldn't have been a problem at all. I even would have made sure that Matt didn't go last in case he had to leave early. But he found out it was going to be like 5, so he wasn't able to be there. And I said, look, let me call Sid. Let me see if we can just switch the things around, and then I'll call you back. And I spoke to Sid, and that's why... And then Sid's funny because he's like, well, maybe we should just, it would be better for the people who are expecting the stream on Thursday to have two of us instead of nothing. And I said, oh, it won't be nothing. I'll just put a reading there instead. I'll just switch it with another thing. So that's what we did. So next week is going to be the Council of Tolkien. That's on the 11th. On the 18th, we will continue to play the Fellowship of the Ring video game for PlayStation 2. And then on the 25th, we won't have a Tolkien stream. I'll be doing a Twitch stream then. But then on the 2nd of October, we'll return with the Council of Tolkien again. So, of course, if you're on my Discord, we go over the schedules a lot there, and I have a scheduled channel and everything. So there's that as well. So, for those of you who are watching on Twitch, we are going to do a raid, which means we're going to send you guys off to somebody else. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, my Gavan and the stream shall end momentarily. Thank you, everybody, for coming by. If you're on the YouTube, please hit that like, hit that heart button there. Consider joining as a member. Subscribe if you're watching and you're not subscribed. And let's see who we're going to raid for Twitch. I believe... Okay, I can't raid her. She's playing Silk Song. I have not... It's going to be a while before I'm able to play Silk Song because I have to schedule-wise. Okay. Zophar's on. Zophar's playing the new Ninja Gaiden, which looks like a really cool game. All right, let's do that. We're going to raid Zophar. Okay, for those of you watching on Twitch, there is your raid call. Copy that, paste it. As we head into Zophar's stream, that doesn't look like Ninja Gaiden. That looks like Popful Mail. Not sure what's going on. We'll see you guys over there. We'll see you guys on Discord. We'll see you guys tomorrow. For those of you on YouTube, we will see you next week with Matt and Sid. Goodbye to everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Here we go.